Chapter 789. Xiao Xian had seen Yi Qi and Yi Zong's movements from beginning to end. After sitting down, Xiao Xian thought about it carefully. In fact, divination was similar to witchcraft incantations in many aspects. For example, knot divination. Every knot and even every detail of the knot was like an incantation in witchcraft incantations. However, not everyone could do that because witchcraft incantations, knot divination, and other divination methods required energy that was different from totem power to activate. Totemic power was a type of fire seed energy, but the fire seed's power was not limited to totems. There were other types of power, such as the power of inheritance. Witchcraft incantations were activated by a special power of inheritance. Similarly, divination relied on a special power as well. The Yi family used a power unique to the Yi family. It was a type of power from the Yi family's fire seed. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, used a different type of power from his body. It had nothing to do with the Yanjiao's fire seed. This special power allowed Xiao Xian to ignore the rejection of other tribes' fire seeds. It allowed him to do things that normal people could not. For example, he could perform the Yi family's knot divination. He could also turn water moonstones into water moonstones like the drumming tribe. All these things showed how special Xiao Xian's power was. Now, Xiao Xian wanted to try again. He wanted to see if he could enter the Yi family's realm that normal people could not see. He was very interested in the Yi family's war. First, he was curious about how the Yi family would wage war. Second, he was curious about the appearance of that person in the desert. Until now, Xiao Xian had never seen one of the legendary founders of Rock Hill City. The man the Yi family regarded as ominous. No matter how old Yi Xiong was 1,000 years ago, 1,000 years had passed. Even the founder of Rock Hill City, Mu Han, had passed away. The people the Yi family had forced Yi Xiong to leave were also long gone. However, this person was still alive. He had tortured so many people in the Yi family to death. Now, he was finally going to attack the Yi family in the royal city. Even if their ancestors were gone, they still had descendants. Revenge was a dish best served cold. Yi Si had once told Xiao Xian that if this ominous really did attack the Yi family, he would do so with the intention of exterminating the entire family. There would be no mercy. Xiao Xian wanted to see just how powerful the legendary ominous of the Yi family was. Unfortunately, the Yi family's war was not something that normal people could see. Discarding all distracting thoughts, Xiao Xian held a straw rope in his hand and replayed Yi Zong and Yi Qi's actions in his mind. Time after time, the memory deepened in his mind. As he repeated everything over and over again, to the point where every detail, every finger movement, and every grain of sand became clear to him, a pair of hands appeared in Xiao Xian's mindscape. When Xiao Xian received the legacy of knot divination from the bansui leaf, he had learned how to use a straw rope to make a divination conclusion from this pair of hands. Right now, the pair of hands were holding a rope. As Xiao Xian repeated Yi Qi's actions in his mind, the pair of hands holding the straw rope in his mindscape moved as well. The rope twined rapidly between the fingers of the pair of hands. Xiao Xian stared intently at the pair of hands. The knotting process was too complicated. Xiao Xian could not keep up with the speed of the pair of hands. Therefore, Xiao Xian stopped what he was doing and memorized every detail of the knotting process. The knots were much more complicated than the ones Xiao Xian usually made for divination. However, because the pair of hands were so fast, it only took them a breath to complete the knot. As the pair of hands finished making the knot, a spell symbol that looked like a burning flame appeared in Xiao Xian's mindscape. The flame on the spell symbol was white at the bottom and orange-red at the top, just like the color of the Yi family's fire seed. When the pair of hands disappeared in his mindscape, the burning spell symbol disappeared as well. Xiao Xian carefully recalled the knotting motions of the pair of hands. His fingers, which were holding the straw rope, started moving as he recalled the knotting motions of the pair of hands. Although he did not know which member of the Yi family had created this legacy of knot divination, he had to admit that it was really impressive. His hands were like a translation machine, presenting the technique formed by the jade, the golden sand, and the square plate in the form of knots. As Xiaofan recalled the movements of the pair of hands in his mind, he slowed down and broke them down bit by bit as he tried to make a knot. The straw rope in his hands also started to be knotted according to the movements of his fingers. However, compared to the knotting speed of the pair of hands in his mindscape, Xiaofan's knotting speed was much slower. Wrong. A slight mistake caused the knot to fail. The straw rope wrapped around Xiaofan's hands. It had been a long time since he had last seen this situation. It wasn't that the divination couldn't work, it was that there was a mistake. Thinking back to when he first practiced knotting knots, he often encountered similar situations. He broke the tangled straw rope in his hands and took out a new straw rope to practice. He recalled every detail of the pair of hands and followed suit. Still wrong. If he was not careful, he would make another mistake. As long as he made a single mistake, the knot would not be able to be tied. Again. He kept recalling Yizong's and Yi Qi's movements. Then, he observed the pair of hands knotting motions. Then, he slowed down the knotting speed and followed suit. Wrong, again. Wrong again, again. Yes, this is it. Xiaofan raised his eyebrows slightly. When the last step was completed, he felt a boom in his brain. It was as if there was a cold current that came out of nowhere, stimulating the nerves in his brain to the point where they seemed to be buzzing. He opened his eyes and looked at the straw rope in his hands. A strange knot had appeared there. Xiaofan could even vaguely feel the subtle changes in his surroundings when the knot appeared. It was as if the air had silently fluctuated. Bang! With a soft sound, the straw rope in Xiaofan's hands broke into pieces. The knotted part of the rope turned into bits of grass. His head was throbbing with pain. He had used too much energy when he was tying the rope just now. It would take a while for him to recover. Xiaofan stared at the broken straw rope in his hands. He didn't know if it was because of the sudden break in the knot, but after the knot was formed, it suddenly fell apart. Fortunately, he had brought more straw rope with him before he came. Because he might need to use straw rope for divination, Xiaofan usually used a different method when he was making straw ropes before a hunt. Every straw rope used for hunting could be divided into more than 10 strands of thin rope. This method was more complicated and took more time, but the straw rope made with this method was stronger. It could also be used for divination. Tracking didn't use a lot of straw rope, but now, Xiaofan wanted to try to enter the other plane that the Yi family had mentioned. This would require a lot of straw rope. After recalling the knotting method from earlier, Xiaofan repeated the knotting action. Success the first time could only be attributed to luck and accident. Only by succeeding every time could one be considered to have mastered the knotting method. There was no room for luck when it came to matters like this. If he couldn't master it now, he might not be able to find the feeling of tying the rope again after some time. He might even miss out on a lot of important insights. The knot that he successfully tied was deeply engraved in Xiaofan's mind. When he succeeded the second time, Xiaofan's hand movements were still not fast, but they were much smoother. Then the third time, the fourth time, after successfully tying 5 knots in a row, Xiaofan temporarily stopped practicing the first knot and moved on to the next one. When all the movements of his hands were put together, he didn't just make one knot. This kind of knot was very draining. Xiaofan rested for a while before starting a new knot. The second knot was even more complicated and difficult. When Xiaofan succeeded in tying the knot, he couldn't wait to leave the sea of consciousness. His vision went dark for a moment. The long-awaited feeling of exhaustion reminded Xiaofan of the first time he practiced knot divination. After resting for a while and drinking some water, he felt much better. It really wasn't easy to watch a battle between the Yi family. If he hadn't tried, he wouldn't have known that the Yi family could withstand such a huge expenditure of energy. Previously, Yi Qi and Yi Zong had done it all in one step. The series of movements seemed to be a whole, without any stagnation or disintegration. That's really not easy. No wonder they're one of the 6 major aristocratic families in the royal city. In the past, the Yi family, which was the early Yi tribe, was also a major tribe. Every major tribe had its reasons for being so powerful. Taking a deep breath, Xiaofan felt his fatigue recede. He continued trying to tie the 3rd knot. In the sea of consciousness, the hands made a total of 8 knots. In other words, not only did Xiaofan have to successfully tie all 8 knots, but he also had to tie all 8 knots consecutively. There couldn't be too long of a break in between, or the knots would directly break. This is a difficult task. Was Xiaofan anxious? Of course he was. If he could learn how to tie all 8 knots smoothly, even if he could see the layer that ordinary people couldn't see, the battle might have already ended. However, there was no point in being anxious. The more anxious he was, the more likely he would make mistakes. He had to remain calm. 8 knots, each more complicated than the last. The easiest one was the first knot. The more he tried, the more difficult it became. The number of failures increased. Fortunately, Xiaofan had some experience with the first few knots. These knots were different from the knots he usually tied during his divination. He couldn't use his past experience to look at these knots. While the feeling was good, try again. 3rd knot, 4th knot, 5th knot. When the 8th knot was finally completed, it had been 2 days since Xiaofan started trying to tie the rope. 2 days, 8 knots, and this was after Xiaofan sacrificed his sleep. He felt as if he had gone through a famine. His entire body was weak, and his back was covered in sweat. Large droplets of sweat dripped down from his forehead. Heaving a long sigh, he casually ate some of the dry rations he had brought with him. He went out to hunt. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Xiaofan felt as if he had been reborn. He glanced at Yi Zong and Yi Qi. 8 slaves were guarding the 2 of them. However, Yi Zong and Yi Qi were still the same as they were the day before yesterday. They were like stone statues, untouched. Chapter 790. After successfully tying all 8 knots, Xiaofan practiced a few more times before combining the knots together. While Xiaofan was practicing his knots at the foot of the mountain range next to Eagle Mountain, a solemn atmosphere filled the air at the Yi family's residence in the royal city on the other side of the sea. After so many years of development, the Yi family had split into many branches. The main branch was the Yi family's main branch, which was the branch that held the most power. At this time, almost all the members of the main branch of the Yi family were in seclusion. In the royal city, there were usually a few high-profile people who made their presence known. But now, not a single member of the main branch of the Yi family was hanging around outside. There were many people standing around the walls of the Yi family's residence. They were all slaves and members of the main branch of the Yi family. Other than them, no one else could even dream of getting close. Since 3 days ago, the street in the royal city that was used for fortune-telling had become empty. Many caravans and trading teams who were unaware of the situation had come here to try to divine their fortunes or predict other things. But to their surprise, they found nothing. They didn't dare to go directly to the Yi family to look for them. Anyone with half a brain could tell that something was wrong. Even if they were curious, they could only watch the Yi family's residence from afar. In fact, it wasn't just the caravans and trading teams who had traveled all the way to the royal city. Even some of the Yi family's youths, who were unaware of the situation, looked around curiously from time to time after they were assigned tasks. The members of the main branch of the E family rarely came to the main branch of the E family. But this time, all the members of the E family were on the move. "Father, why does everyone look so nervous? What are those people from the main branch trying to do? I heard that they are going to fight someone." "Who are they going to fight with?" a youth from the main branch of the E family asked his father. If it was in the past, when his father heard someone mention the people from the main branch, he would definitely say some sarcastic words. The people from the main branch usually ordered the people from the side branches around and did not have a good attitude. It was just that they did not dare to vent their accumulated resentment, so they only talked about it in private. But at this time, the boy's father frowned, his eyes filled with worry. Hearing his son's question, he looked up and said sternly in a low voice, "Shut up. Keep an eye on the surroundings. Kill whoever dares to barge in at this time." Hearing his father's attitude, the youth nervously swallowed his saliva. He knew that this time was different from the past and the situation was likely quite serious. But since his father didn't want to say more to him, he didn't dare to ask. Looking around, he whispered, "Yes." Then he closed his mouth tightly and didn't make another sound. Nearly 100 people were gathered in a large courtyard in the center of the E family. They were all members of the main bloodline, and they were all rather powerful members of the main bloodline. 1/3 of them were known as masters in the royal city. No matter how arrogant they usually were or how pretentious they were outside, here, they were all obedient students, sitting in their seats obediently. Whether it was the people sitting on the cushions in the center of the courtyard or the people from the other main bloodline standing around, they all waited in silence. It was this kind of waiting that made the atmosphere more solemn. This kind of suffocating pressure could be felt even by the people outside the E family. The sky also became gloomier than before. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from afar. They were fast, but they didn't sound rushed or anxious. As soon as they heard the footsteps, the people in the courtyard who were still in a daze immediately calmed down. There were 8 people in total. The 3 people standing at the front were all white-haired old men. These were the elders of the E family who usually didn't care about worldly affairs. They were the truly senior and powerful elders of the E family, and they would only appear when it was truly a matter of life and death. Behind the 3 elders was the head of the E family. In the eyes of the tribesmen, he was the leader of the family. This kind of person usually had the final say in the E family. Not many people dared to talk back to him. But now, he was only the 4th in line. The 3 elders in front of him were his great-grandmother, and the other 2 were also very senior. When one of the elders called him, he bowed slightly and respectfully walked over to listen. "Not everyone is here yet?" asked an elder with cloudy white eyes without looking at the courtyard. Although he couldn't see, it didn't affect his perception of the outside world. Sometimes, he could even see more than the average person. "Most of them are here. Only a few who were out on missions couldn't make it back in time. Izong and I Chi are still on another continent, but they should be ready by now," replied the head of the E family. The elder wasn't angry because of this. After all, those who were out on missions could still participate in the battle. "Let's do the divination," said the white-haired old woman standing next to the head of the E family. The other 2 elders nodded. The head of the E family said loudly, "Let's do the divination." This was something the E family did every time there was a major event. The so-called divination was to take out the precious item left behind by their ancestors. It was a tortoiseshell. The tortoiseshell was engraved with orange-red words and lines. The words weren't common words, but runes that only the E family could understand. The lines vaguely formed the totem of the E family. On the other hand, the tortoiseshell was completely white without any patterns or engravings. Inside the tortoiseshell, in the space between the tortoiseshell and the tortoiseshell, there were a total of 8 polished bones of different shapes. "Who's going to do the divination this time?" asked an elder. The white-haired old woman twirled the walking stick in her hand. "I did the divination for the last family meeting. This time, it's Yituan's turn." The cloud-eyed elder didn't say anything. He walked forward and lifted the tortoiseshell with both hands, then returned to his seat. The 3 mats at the front of the courtyard were for the 3 of them. After sitting down, Yituan placed his right hand on the tortoiseshell's back. The tortoiseshell was bigger than his palm. Normally, he wouldn't have been able to grab it. But now, the tortoiseshell seemed to be glued to Yituan's palm. Yituan shook his wrist. The bones in the tortoiseshell jumped with a clatter. When he raised his hand, the tortoiseshell didn't fall down. The bones didn't fall through the cracks either. Instead, they continued to jump inside the tortoiseshell. Flames appeared. An arc of fire appeared in front of Yituan. Crimson and white flames rose on the other side of the arc. 3 long shadows appeared behind Yituan. Yituan reached his tortoiseshell hand towards the fire. As the tortoiseshell approached the fire, the bones in the tortoiseshell jumped even more violently, making more urgent sounds. Crack, 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 the cracking sound drowned out the bones in the tortoiseshell. Orange-red cracks appeared on the tortoiseshell's belly. When the cracking stopped, Yituan retracted his hand and looked at the cracks. He had lost his eyesight, but that didn't stop him from seeing the cracks. The more he looked, the more serious his expression became, the more worried his eyes grew. Yituan passed the tortoiseshell to the other 2 elders. Their expressions weren't much better than Yituan's. "Looks like the Yi family is in for a tough battle," said Yituan. In fact, the results of the cracks were worse than what Yituan had said. It wasn't a tough battle, it was a battle to the death. But there was a chance of survival in death. But that chance was full of variables. The 3 elders knew this. But they couldn't say the results of the tortoiseshell now. They didn't want to waver before the battle. Sighing almost imperceptibly, Yituan said loudly, "Prepare for battle." A powerful ripple of power swept across the spacious courtyard like a sudden wave. The people around the courtyard didn't dare to breathe loudly. The orange-red gaseous flames that could be seen with the naked eye filled the surroundings and rolled around. Everything that the naked eye could see seemed to be distorted. Whoosh, inside the tortoise shell, the sound of the bone pieces hitting the tortoise shell was hurried. The courtyard seemed to have blocked out all sounds. The sound of insects, the sound of leaves, the sound of people breathing, everything disappeared. The clattering of the bone pieces became the only sound in the courtyard. Whoosh, the clattering grew more urgent until it suddenly stopped. Open. It was as if an ancient beast had opened its black maw where Yituan was, swallowing everything in the courtyard. The surrounding buildings, people, flowers, and trees all disappeared, leaving only emptiness. Of course, this was only seen by the 100 or so people sitting in the courtyard. As for the people standing at the edge of the courtyard, other than a large totem in the courtyard and the powerful aura fluctuations brought about by the crimson flame, there were no other major changes. In the emptiness, everyone's figures blurred. They could only vaguely make out a human figure glowing in flames. Even their silhouettes blurred occasionally, their faces indistinguishable. Yituan could sense that the person they were waiting for was about to appear. The person who had been predicted to bring misfortune to the Yi family 1,000 years ago would soon appear before them. Soon, several figures appeared in the emptiness not far from them. They were members of the Yi family who couldn't make it back in time. Another figure appeared with the appearance of the Yi family's totem. Yi Qi, Yi Zong. The Yi family recognized them. Even though they couldn't see their faces, they recognized their auras. The Yi family didn't ask Yi Qi or Yi Zong about the situation. Nothing mattered now except the impending battle. Why waste time asking about unimportant things? After gathering, the 3 elders of the Yi family allowed everyone to get used to the new environment. Some newcomers would feel uncomfortable, so they came early. After a while, Yi Tuan's eyebrows twitched as he looked into the emptiness. Yi Tuan wasn't the only one. The other two elders also looked over warily. Everyone else behind them paused. Did someone else come from there? The Yi family head was also racking his brains. He could not think of anyone who had not appeared here while on a mission. Even if there was, they would have appeared a little late. Based on the time, it should have been a few days ago. The Yi family wouldn't make such a mistake. Excluding all these, could it be that the person who appeared now was their enemy this time? Knots? Yi Tuan couldn't hide his surprise. With their abilities, they could tell how anyone who wasn't in the Yi family's headquarters got in. The ripples weren't the Yi family's usual method but the long-lost knots. He wasn't familiar with knot divination and only knew a little about it. He could guess what method was used based on the ripples. Knots? The rest of the Yi family were equally shocked. Didn't the Yi family's knots branch disappear a long time ago? Why would they appear here now? No, there was someone else. Yi Xiong knew knots too. This meant that even if the person wasn't Yi Xiong, he was very likely related to him. Knots were a type of grass. Together with armor and bone divination, grass was the Yi family's three most powerful divination branches. Divination came from them. Rumor had it that the ancestors of the grass branch only needed to pluck a blade of grass from a mountain to know what they wanted to know. Unfortunately, time passed quickly, and many years had passed. In the end, only the knotted rope school was left of the originally complicated grass school. The other schools had already evolved, more or less adding other materials to assist them. Some had even absorbed the elements of armor and bone reading to create other new methods. The knotted rope school was also regarded as the most conservative, stubborn, and unreasonable school. At the same time, it was also the poorest school. This was because the knotted rope school did not have the concept of money, nor did they pursue material pursuits. If someone they did not like offered a lot of money, they would not lend a helping hand. As a result, they were gradually pushed aside, becoming destitute and declining. The last master of knots died 1,000 years ago. What made the Yi family gnash their teeth was that the master had taken in a disciple before he died. The master only took in one disciple in his life, and that disciple was the thorn in the Yi family's throat, Yi Xiong. When Yi Xiong left, he took the master's knots legacy with him. Since then, the Yi family no longer practiced traditional knots. Knots disappeared, but it didn't affect the Yi family much. Later generations of the Yi family came up with even more powerful divination methods. The first thought that came to everyone's mind was, is there a traitor? Yi Qi, Yi Zong, who were you with before you came? Yi Tuan suddenly asked. Yi Qi and Yi Zong were taken aback by Yi Tuan's question, not understanding why. Was Yi Tuan suspecting them? Suspecting them of betrayal? That wasn't right either. Yi Tuan's voice was stern, but it wasn't directed at them. This wasn't the tone of a traitor. Several people flashed through Yi Qi's mind, including Xiaofan, but he firmly rejected them. It couldn't be that tribesman. Tribesmen couldn't possibly know about the Yi family's core. Yi Zong was also thinking. The first thing that came to mind was Yinjiao Xiaofan, but he didn't believe it either, so he didn't know how to answer. Soon, the ripples became more obvious. There were even flames, indicating that a figure was about to appear. However, unlike the Yi family, there was no Yi family totem. Before Yi Zong and Yi Qi appeared, there would be a Yi family totem formed from the fire seeds flames beneath their feet. What did it mean if there was no Yi family totem? They weren't even from the Yi family. Yi Xiong was also from the Yi family and had Yi family blood in him. This wouldn't happen. Then who was it? Yi Zong's guess suddenly became 80% likely. Xiaofan? Is it Xiaofan from the Yanjiao tribe? What? A tribesman? And a Yanjiao tribesman? Even the three leading figures were stunned. If one could see their expressions, they would be filled with shock and disbelief. If the speaker wasn't Yizong but someone else from the Yi family, they would have been scolded. However, Yizong was a genius of the younger generation. He wasn't one to spout nonsense or make random guesses. While the Yi family was still in shock and disbelief, the flames grew bigger and bigger. Unlike the Yi family's fire seed, the flames were crimson but there was still no totem. The flames finally condensed into a blurry figure. It was much more blurry than anyone else in the Yi family. It looked like it could scatter at any moment. This aura. Yi Qi looked in that direction as if he had been struck by a bell. Yanjiao. Xiaofan. Chapter 791. Xiaofan felt his eyes burning, and it was difficult for him to even open them. It was as if someone was hammering his head with a hammer, causing him to feel a dull pain. His eardrums also hurt so badly that he even suspected that he had gone deaf. There was a cacophony of noises all around him. It sounded like the collective howling of wild beasts in the forest, but it also sounded like someone was making a racket. The cacophony was endless, but it didn't feel real. Even if he covered his ears, the cacophony wouldn't stop. Xiaofan didn't know why it was like this. He was just practicing the 8 knots, and as he gradually became more familiar with them, he suddenly felt his surroundings change. The sudden change brought about a strong sense of discomfort, as if he was in a different world. Xiaofan couldn't even sense Cha-Cha's aura. His eyes couldn't see what was going on around him, but after switching to his special vision, Xiaofan could finally see things clearly. He could see some balls of light not far in front of him. No, they weren't balls of light, they were a group of people. To be precise, they were a group of human-shaped flames. They looked like human figures, and the color of the flames was a combination of orange, red and white. It was the color of the Yi family's fire seed. Gradually, the discomfort in his body subsided, and the cacophony of noises in his ears faded until it disappeared. His surroundings were completely silent. Xiaofan removed his hands from his ears and stood still. He looked at the balls of light over there. After switching to his normal vision, what he saw wasn't much different from what he saw with his special vision. His surroundings were still pitch black, and he couldn't see the end of it. In the darkness, the gathering of the balls of light was the most obvious. Xiaofan, Yanjiao. A voice with obvious shock and astonishment sounded. It seemed that Xiaofan's appearance was very unexpected, and he couldn't believe it. Xiaofan looked in that direction. As his body quickly adapted to this place, he could also sense the movements over there. He could also sense the aura of the speaker, and of course, he could also hear the speaker's voice clearly. Yi Qi? Xiaofan looked at a figure. He couldn't see the person's face, but he could tell from his voice and aura. Xiaofan also recognized Yizong, who was standing beside Yi Qi. It's really you. How did you get here? Yi Qi still couldn't figure out how Xiaofan had followed them here. Didn't he ask them to tell him the method? But at that time, he and Yizong did not say anything, nor did they tell Xiaofan how to enter this place. In fact, Xiaofan was not even a member of the Yi family. Or could it be that Xiaofan actually had Yi family blood in him? Yi Qi was not the only one with this thought. Even the 3 highest-ranking elders had their doubts for a moment. But the truth before their eyes told them that Xiaofan did not have any Yi family aura, because Xiaofan did not have any Yi family power. Even the color of his flames was different. Without Yi family blood, without Yi family power, how did this tribesman enter this place? They couldn't figure it out, they couldn't figure it out. This was completely impossible, but it really happened. It drove the Yi family crazy. Where did you learn how to knot? Asked Yi Tuan. Xiaofan looked at Yi Tuan and the other 2 figures beside him. Among the group, these three figures were the most solid and clear, unlike the others who would occasionally emit flames to ruin their silhouettes. By chance, said Xiaofan. In fact, Xiaofan was also very curious. What kind of place was this? Although he was here, he knew nothing about this place. Moreover, Yizong and Yi Qi had left for several days. Xiaofan had spent 2 to 3 days practicing all 8 knots, then another 2 to link them together. In total, it had been 4 to 5 days. But where was the legendary Yi Xiang? Wasn't there a battle? Why hadn't it started? You're lying, you're definitely with Yi Xiang, someone from the Yi family said. However, Yi Tuan raised a hand and the commotion died down. Why are you here? Asked Yi Tuan. As Yi Tuan spoke, Xiaofan felt as if an invisible sword was pointed at him. If he was not careful, it would fall on him. I've long heard that the Yi family is different from the rest. I was just curious and came here by accident. I was tying knots and came in. Don't worry, I'm just here to take a look, said Xiaofan. He suddenly thought of a problem. He could enter but he did not know how to leave. Impulsive. Xiaofan thought. Xiaofan did not expect to enter this strange place so quickly. He had even thought of not being able to enter. After all, Yizong had said that without the Yi family's bloodline and fire seed, one could not enter. Whether he's telling the truth or not, we cannot allow any uncontrollable accidents in this battle, said an elder. This meant that Xiaofan, who had appeared here, would be chased out or killed. Logically speaking, they should have done so to remove any interference. However, Yi Tuan suddenly thought of the crack in the tortoise shell during the divination. Was the sliver of life in death also an accident? That accident, was it referring to this person who suddenly appeared in front of him? Yi Tuan also wanted to know why Xiaofan was here. He did not connect Xiaofan to Yi Xiang. Xiaofan's current state and the way he covered his ears when he appeared were similar to the Yi family when they first came here. Other than the nodding method, Xiaofan had nothing to do with Yi Xiang. The Yi family had a lot to think about. Sometimes, a seemingly small matter could affect the bigger picture. The more important the situation was, the more they had to think twice and act with caution. To many, the Yi family thought too much and were not decisive enough. Now, Yi Tuan was faced with the same choice. Kill? Or not kill? He had many doubts but soon, Yi Tuan made his choice. Yi Xiang is coming. Ignore that tribesman for now. Since he did not know what to do with Xiaofan, he would put him aside for now. If Xiaofan did anything strange, he was confident that he could kill Xiaofan. In this place, they were much stronger than Xiaofan. Xiaofan looked like he was about to disappear at any moment. Another elder had a different opinion. They were not on good terms with the Yanjiao tribe and even had old grudges. However, he understood Yi Tuan's choice. It was better to pay more attention to Yi Xiang. At Yi Tuan's words, the others shifted their attention away from Xiaofan and focused. Compared to Xiaofan, who was obviously new here, this dangerous person was more worthy of their attention. If they could see their faces clearly, they would see unease and fear in some of their eyes. After all, this dangerous person was the Yi family's unlucky star that even their ancestors could not defeat. Xiaofan deliberately kept his distance from them. He just wanted to watch from the sidelines. Even if he wanted to take revenge on the Yi family, now was not the time. He did not have the right time, place, or people. Although the situation here was different from what he expected, he had no plans to leave just yet. Since he was here, he might as well watch. He did not want to be affected, so he kept his distance to show that he was watching from the sidelines. No matter which side won this internal battle, the remaining side would still be at odds with the Yanjiao tribe. Xiaofan could learn more about the people on both sides through the battlefield, which would help him in the future. Especially Yi Xiang, who had to be carefully observed. This was why Xiaofan was willing to risk entering this place. His understanding of Yixiang was limited to what he heard from others and the pitiful records left by his ancestors. On the mainland, in the desert of Rock Hill City, a hooded figure slowly walked into the underground palace. Shu respectfully followed behind and walked in together. There were no other Rock Hill City people in the underground palace, only a few figures covered in linen. Even the stones used for light were pitifully few. Faint shadows on the stone walls of the walkway changed with each person's movements. The hooded figure in front of Shu revealed a pale hand from his wide sleeve. The hand was very thin, as if only a layer of skin was attached to the bones. The shape of the bones at the joints was very obvious. The palm of the hand was slightly raised, holding a string of objects. Some pieces of wood had been shaved into various shapes with holes drilled in the middle. They were then connected by straw ropes to form a closed loop. 4 fingers were slightly curled in the palm of the hand. His thumb rested on a piece of wood the size of a fingernail. Every piece of wood on the string was engraved with patterns, but not everyone could understand them. There was a circular hall in the underground palace. As he walked towards the center of the hall, the man in the cloak moved the wooden ornament on his hand with his thumb at a steady pace, as if he was an old man taking a leisurely stroll. When he was about to reach the center of the hall, he slightly raised his other hand that was not holding any wooden ornament and waved it slightly. Shu, who was following behind, immediately stopped and bowed to the other party. He glanced at the 5 people guarding the hall. These 5 people were also covered in linen. He couldn't see their faces and they weren't breathing. Retracting his gaze, Shu turned and left the hall. As he waved his hand, the hooded figure's footsteps didn't change, still maintaining his original speed and strength. When he walked into the center of the hall, when his foot landed on the last step, his thumb pressed against a piece of wood on the wooden ornament and paused. A flame suddenly lit up and drew an arc in front of him. The orange, red and white fireball ignited. The flames weren't tall, but the entire underground palace was under an extremely strong pressure. All the illuminating stones in the underground palace shattered with a bang. The entire underground palace, except for the fire in the main hall, was plunged into darkness. The guards outside the underground palace suddenly felt as if there was a mountain pressing down on them. Bean-sized beads of sweat continued to slide down. After they were 100 meters away from the underground palace, the pressure gradually eased. When Shu walked to the entrance of the underground palace, he felt a sense of collapse. When the pressure in the underground palace appeared, he hadn't walked out of the underground palace. He wasn't far from the entrance, only a distance of 10 steps. But these 10 steps, although it wasn't a long distance, made him sweat like he had just been fished out of the water. He gasped for breath as if he had just experienced a great battle. Waving his hand to block the people who came to support him under the pressure, Shu walked forward with difficulty as if he was wearing heavy shackles. The further he went from the underground palace, the easier his feet became and the pressure on his body gradually decreased. After walking out of the underground palace and another 100 meters away, Shu breathed a sigh of relief and turned to look at the underground palace. A stone door blocked the entrance to the underground palace. It made a loud bang. The yellow sand above seemed to be driven by the vibration and slid down. In the blink of an eye, the entrance to the underground palace was buried. Looking from a distance, only a sand dune could be seen. Chapter 792. Xiaofan was trying his best to get used to this place. Although it was much better than when he first arrived, he still felt uncomfortable. Although he could still stand, he felt as though he was suspended in midair. It didn't feel like he was stepping on the ground, but he couldn't fall. He could still walk if he wanted to. It was really strange. He didn't have a physical body, but he could still hear and see. Xiaofan had guessed that this place might have been created using the power of the fire seed. However, there were still many inconsistencies. The darkness around him also seemed to hide many things that couldn't be seen. It was mysterious and unpredictable. However, Xiaofan didn't think too much about it. Soon, he felt a strong wave of energy coming from somewhere. It was similar to the energy coming from the Yi family, but there were also obvious differences. Anyone could tell the difference between the two. A line of fire suddenly appeared in the void in the distance, drawing an arc in the place where the power fluctuations were. A ball of fire appeared at one end of the arc. Whether it was the arc of fire or the ball of fire, they were very different from the ones on the Yi family side. The most obvious difference was that the ratio of the two colors in the flames was different. On the Yi family side, the ratio of orange-red flames to white flames was almost 50/50. However, the arc of fire and ball of fire that appeared now was dominated by white flames, accounting for more than 2/3 of the flames. On the other end of the arc of fire, a figure appeared. It was a very clear figure that seemed to be flashing with fire. Renbaqian could even see the slight movement of the cloak that this person was wearing. Xiaofan had already noticed that the stronger one was, the clearer the figure formed here. This clarity didn't refer to the appearance of the figure. Everyone was formed by flames, so he couldn't see their faces. On the Yi family side, there were only orange-red and white flames. There were almost no other colors. The so-called clarity referred to the silhouette of each figure and the overall feeling of the figure. Xiaofan was the weakest among them. This was because he could only vaguely make out the shape of a human. The flames fluttered, and it looked like a gust of wind could blow them away. In comparison, the Yi family was much clearer, especially the three leaders of the Yi family. But now, this newcomer was even clearer than the three elders from the Yi family. It was as if all the flames that formed this figure were used to condense this figure. Not a single bit of the flame spread out. The edges became clearer and clearer, forming a clear boundary with the surrounding darkness. With just a glance, the difference in strength was immediately apparent. As soon as this figure appeared, Xiaofan could clearly sense the tension in the Yi family. They were afraid. "Yi Xiang?" Yi Tuan asked in a low voice. Although Yi Xiang was superior to them in terms of strength and seniority, Yi Xiang was someone the Yi family was determined to get rid of. Hence, seniority did not matter at all. There was no respect in his tone as he called Yi Xiang by his name. His tone was filled with caution and caution. Yi Tuan had wanted to ask why Yi Xiang wanted to kill the Yi family. After all, Yi Xiang was still a member of the Yi family. Did he really want to wipe out the Yi family? Also, where did the important things the Yi family took away go? Did he really create those monsters in the desert? Yi Tuan had many questions to ask Yi Xiang, but Yi Xiang had no intention of answering. He did not even make a sound. Xiaofan saw the newcomer look up at Yi Tuan's words. Then, without a word, he walked towards the Yi family. As he walked, the totem beneath his feet moved as well. The fireball in front of the arc of fire was not directly in front of him, but diagonally above him, moving with Yi Xiang's movements. Yi Tuan's heart tightened. He knew that Yi Xiang did not even want to talk to them. Without another word, he shouted, "Guard the formation." The 100 or so members of the Yi family were not here to attack, but to guard the formation. If they went out alone, they would only end up as cannon fodder. They were only useful when guarding the formation. These 100 people were the core and most outstanding members of the Yi family. The Yi family had really put in a lot of effort this time. A huge totem appeared beneath their feet and expanded. Their powers merged into one. Beneath their feet, including Yi Tuan and the other two elders, there was no small totem. Instead, there was a large Yi family totem. The curved path of flames formed a wall of fire in front of them. In front of the wall was a huge ball of fire, half orange-red and half white, exuding the powerful aura of a fire seed. Their combined might made one's heart tremble. Fiery light surged, and it was even more dazzling than when it first appeared. A fire pit? The aura and the flames made Xiaoxian feel like a temporary fire pit had been built. However, it was understandable. Blood and fire came from the same source. After the fire seed fused, everyone could be seen as a small fire seed. When these small fire seeds gathered together, they would form a large fire seed. Not only could it play a certain defensive role, it could also provide power to those nearby. However, although the combined aura of the 100 or so people looked powerful, Xiaoxian felt that many of the Yi family members did not seem confident at all. Solemn and nervous, this was probably how most of the Yi family felt. Go! Yi Tuan raised his hand. A bright white dot flew out of his palm. It passed through the fire and instantly transformed into a 20-meter-tall beast. It looked like a tiger or a leopard, but its figure was blurry. Flames rose around it. Although it was only made of fire, one could see that it was a lithe beast. A long howl that belonged to a beast rang out in the dark void, spreading in all directions. It was deafening. Xiaoxian was far away, but he felt like the roar was right next to his ear. It was so loud that his brain went numb. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would have thought that it was a ferocious beast from the forest that was about to go on a killing spree. The beast arched its back like a taut bow. The next moment, it opened its back and sprinted forward. Every step it took covered nearly 100 meters, heading straight for Yi Xiang. It sped up, leaving a long tail of fire behind it. The two parties were originally quite far away, but in the blink of an eye, they were close. A bone-reading beast. Bone reading was the beast bones used by the Yi family for divination. Everything came with a price. Everything was balanced, including the Yi family's ability to foresee the future. Divination relied on the vitality of animals and plants. For example, bone reading. The Yi family's ancestors discovered that even the bones of dead beasts contained vitality. Their divination relied on the vitality of the beasts in the oracle bones to predict the past or the future. Similarly, the Yi family often used this method in their battles. The objects that everyone used for divination, regardless of whether it was the bone divination branch, the armor divination branch, or the various divination techniques that were now mixed together, all possessed a certain amount of vitality, including stones. Yes, stones. The Yi family's ancestors believed that stones were the bones of the earth and contained a great deal of vitality. Hence, after the oracle bones, they began to add stones to their divination. These stones were not randomly picked up but were carefully selected to contain vitality. For example, the jade stones used by Yi Zong and Yi Qi were used to carry out their divination using the vitality of these stones. Whether it was the oracle bones or jade stones, regardless of whether they were found or gifted, as long as they held them in their hands, they could be used for divination or for internal battles within the Yi family. Xiaoxian had heard about this from Yi Si and Yi Zong, but this was the first time he had seen the Yi family use bone reading in this way. Yi Tuan's flaming beast must have been the beast's form when it was alive. Seeing this, Xiaoxian suddenly remembered the ancestral bone ornaments he was wearing. Speaking of which, the bone ornaments left behind by his ancestors were also made from his own bones. Could the power contained within them be the vitality left behind by his ancestors? He thought about the flaming giant that had appeared many times in the past and compared it to the Yi family's methods. Although they were different, there were similarities. It didn't matter if it was similar or not, Xiaoxian didn't have time to think too much about it because they were about to collide. A beast roar even louder than before rang out again. Accompanying this roar was the bone-reading beast's final leap towards Yi Xiang. To everyone's surprise, Yi Xiang did not use the bone-reading beast or the shell-reading beast, nor did he use the divination techniques of the other Yi family members. He did not even try to dodge. Instead, he took a step towards the bone-reading beast and raised his hand. A strange energy rippled from his hand and collided with the bone-reading beast. Chapter 793. Compared to the beast's ferocious aura, Yi Xiong was not only small in size, he did not give off a powerful aura either. Yi Xiong and the fire beast, one was outwardly radiant while the other was inwardly restrained. Both gave off a strange vibe. This scene was not balanced. However, everyone had an answer that they did not want to admit. While the people far away were not affected, Xiaofan could sense that Yi Xiong's raised hand seemed to be restraining a powerful force within a limited area. This was why Yi Xiong gave off a reserved aura. A direct clash. When the raised hand collided with the flaming beast, an indescribable aura filled the area. The bone-reading beast's flames were blocked, as if it had hit an invisible wall. It could not advance any further. Boom! The collision of power brought about a powerful tremor, causing the dark void to distort. A trace of frenzied aura recklessly exploded, as if it wanted to tear apart everything it came into contact with. Everything that stood in its way was shattered into pieces. In the dark void, it was as if a violent hurricane had suddenly appeared. At that moment, it made people feel as if there was an unparalleled force flowing in all directions. On the battlefield, the bone-reading beast's flaming body was not only unable to advance any further in front of the hand, it began to crack from head to toe, all the way to its elongated tail. Not a single part of it was spared. A bright white dot appeared as the flaming beast's body cracked open. The next moment, it was caught by the hand. The 5 fingers clenched tightly, the sound of bones cracking could be heard. That sound did not come from the hand, but from the bright white light in the hand. The light disappeared. And with the sound of bones breaking, the massive flame behemoth seemed to explode from the inside. Countless sparks splashed out, and the originally powerful energy fluctuations became even more violent. It was as if the entire void was shaking and shaking. Gusts of wind swept out from the battlefield along with the splashing sparks. The orange-red sparks were like brilliant fireworks, flying from the battlefield to the farthest reaches of the void. The resulting storm seemed to blow people away. Blowing people away? Yes, the silhouettes of many of the figures were blurred by the tremor. The flames that made up the figures seemed to be dispersing. Even the 3 elders of the Yi family were blurred for a moment. Even Xiaofan, who was far away from the battlefield, was affected. It was as if his entire body was locked in a cage, and he was being violently shaken. His head was dizzy, and his consciousness was momentarily scattered. It was uncomfortable, but Xiaofan endured it and quickly gathered his consciousness again. However, although it was uncomfortable and he was still affected, Xiaofan also gained something. The scene just now gave Xiaofan a great deal of inspiration. Every trace of energy fluctuation had its reason for existence, and Xiaofan was able to deduce its origin and cause from these details. Xiaofan realized that the clash between Yi Tuan's bone-reading beast and Yi Xiong was not a battle intent brought about by another form of life, but a push from the consciousness of the exorcist. A push from the consciousness. Xiaofan felt as if he had found a way to leave this place. However, he did not want to leave just yet. It was rare for him to meet the legendary Yi Xiong of the Yi family, and he was unwilling to leave just like that. He had yet to see how powerful Yi Xiong was. Furthermore, observing Yi Xiong's abilities was his goal in coming here. Let's wait and see. Xiaofan thought. The scattered sparks seemed to be scorching hot, but the Yi family felt a chill run down their spines. This was just a test from Yi Tuan, but it was not a casual attack. If it had been used on anyone else, it would have been a fatal blow. However, against Yi Xiong, who was walking slowly towards him, it was reduced to nothingness in a single blow. What little confidence they had left fell again, and fear rose in their hearts. The rumors were true, Yi Xiong was indeed powerful. This was only a probing exchange. His true strength was still unknown for the time being. For the Yi family, the unknown was the scariest. Yi Tuan shuddered in disbelief. Even though Xiaofan could not see his face in his current form, he could guess his expression. The white light was the fire beast's source of power, a bone that gathered all the life energy in the beast's bones. Just now, the fire beast's source of power had been destroyed. It could no longer exist. At the same time, in the Yi family's mansion in the royal city, a bone in front of Yi Tuan shattered with a crack. Amidst the oppressive silence, the cracking sound came abruptly. Everyone standing in the surroundings looked over. A middle-aged man nearby stared at the broken bone in front of Yi Tuan, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. "It's broken, it's broken." A large bead of sweat dripped from the man's forehead. Broken meant the bone was useless. In the Yi family's words, the bone was truly dead, with no life energy left in it. It wasn't that he hadn't expected this situation, but it came too quickly, so quickly that the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. Each bone Yi Tuan used came from a powerful fearsome beast. The fact that it could survive to this day meant that it came from a giant beast that looked like a tiger or a leopard. It was a ferocious fearsome beast when it was alive. Its bones had great vitality. But now, this bone had shattered, and it shattered very cleanly. It shattered into pieces almost instantly, not giving anyone time to react at all. How long had it been? This was not good. This was the same thought that came to everyone's mind. In the endless darkness of the void, Yi Xiang, who had paused for a moment because of the fire beast, looked at Yi Tuan and the rest, speaking in a rare moment. "Your generation is not good." His tone was flat and emotionless, and it was impossible to tell his age. It was even more impossible to guess what the speaker was feeling at this moment. If it had been anyone else, they would have exuded an indescribable cold arrogance. But Yi Xiang was different. He exuded an eerie calmness, though no one knew how much madness was hidden under that calmness. Yi Xiang's rare words were the first he had spoken since he appeared. In layman's terms, he was calling Yi Tuan and the rest a bunch of trash. This was a resounding slap to the faces of all the Yi family members, including Yi Tuan and the other two old men. Yi Tuan was infuriated to be rejected by a senior of the family, and a traitor of the Yi family at that. But he had to admit that the test had surprised them. Yi Xiang turned to look in Xiaofan's direction. He could not see Yi Xiang's face, but Xiaofan could feel his eyes boring into his brain and heart. At this moment, he felt like he was being seen through by Yi Xiang's eyes. "Xiaofan. Why are you looking at me like that?" Xiaofan was prepared to retreat at the first sign of trouble. This was the Yi family's home ground. He would not gain any advantage here. He would not fight the Yi family directly, much less the unknown Yi Xiang. If he did, Xiaofan would have to retreat. He was not a member of the Yi family anyway. He did not have the family's pride to fight Yi Xiang. Fortunately, Yi Xiang did not continue to stare at Xiaofan. After a brief glance, he turned to Yi Tuan and the rest and started walking again. His speed and distance were exactly the same as before, as if measured by a machine. Xiaofan had a feeling that Yi Xiang was like a ticking time bomb with a dial. His legs were the needle on the dial. When the needle reached the end, it would cause an even more destructive storm. Chapter 794. Xiaofan watched as Yi Xiang lifted the hand that had smacked the bone-reading beast away, then drew an arc in front of him. In the next instant, the arc of fire on the Yi family totem under Yi Xiang's feet expanded abruptly, spreading to both sides like a raging river. The flames on the fire path rose higher, no longer restrained. Like a gathering of 10,000 beasts, they were about to charge forward. Yi Xiang's totem had been the size of a normal totem, but now it had expanded to the size of a few hundred people. It was about the same size as Yi Tuan's totem, perhaps even larger. Yi Tuan felt even more pressured by the fact that one person could do this. If possible, he did not want to fight such a person, but he had no choice. Xiaoxian's brows twitched. Even from afar, he could clearly feel the pressure spreading from the other side. Although his body was not here, Xiaoxian felt his hair stand on end, as if a cold current was running through his body. This was not going to work. Yi Tuan's probing earlier had affected Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian would not be able to avoid an even bigger storm. The next clash between the two sides would be a real battle of strength. Strong against strong, tough against tough. If Xiaoxian continued to stay here, he would become cannon fodder. It was not safe, it was too dangerous. Was it worth the risk to stay? After some thought, Xiaoxian decided to leave. Just now, when the two sides collided for the first time, he had figured out a way to leave. He planned to give it a try. It would be best if he could leave, but if he couldn't, he would retreat a little further and then be prepared to welcome the impact of the storm. This was a form that surpassed his consciousness. It was similar to when he controlled the flame giant. Xiaoxian thought as he observed himself. As if parting a cloud, Xiaoxian saw a white dot. Xiaoxian suddenly thought of Yi Tuan's bone-reading beast. Like the bone-reading beast, the white dot was the core of Xiaoxian's existence. It was similar to, but not limited to. It also had powerful life force, like a soul. At this moment, there were many more flames wrapped around the bright white. What Xiaoxian needed to do now was to remove all the flames that were wrapped around the bright white flame. Using only his consciousness, he could use the power available in this state. Although it looked like he had left his body, he could still use many powers, such as totemic power and another power in Xiaoxian's body. What Xiaoxian was using now was a power that was not from the Yanjiao fire seed. A thin white line of fire appeared around the white flame. Under the control of Xiaoxian's consciousness, it circled around the white flame. Every time it circled around the white flame, a part of the flame would be taken away. 1 circle, 2 circles. At first, the white line of fire slowly circled around, but later, it skillfully sped up to form a whirlpool, enveloping the bright white and red flames. Bit by bit, the white flames were taken away by the white line of fire. The white flames also gradually became thicker, and the surroundings were covered by the red flames. This was only happening in his sea of consciousness. In this dark void, the human-shaped flame on Xiaoxian's body decreased from bottom to top at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if it was disintegrating on its own according to a specific pattern. Yi Xiang, who was about to attack Yi Tuan, paused, turning to look at Xiaoxian. Yi Tuan saw Yi Xiang's reaction and glanced over as well, only to see half of the figure disappearing. There was a person standing there, of course people would notice. Although Yi Tuan focused all his attention on Yi Xiang, many people from the Yi family were also watching Xiaoxian. Their target this time was not Xiaoxian, but they would not trust a tribesman, especially one with old grudges. Of course they had to be cautious. The moment Xiaoxian started moving, the guards noticed that Xiaoxian was about to leave. However, they were more concerned about Yi Xiang and pretended not to see Xiaoxian. After all, Xiaoxian was about to leave. They did not expect Xiaoxian's disappearance to attract Yi Xiang's attention. Yi Xiang even stopped in his tracks. When Xiaoxian completely disappeared, Yi Tuan sensed carefully but could not sense Xiaoxian's presence. Right now, there was only the Yi family's fire seed's aura in the air, nothing else. They had wondered if Xiaoxian was the unforeseen accident, but now it seemed that was not the case. Yi Tuan did not know whether to sigh in relief or disappointment. His emotions were complicated. Xiaoxian from the Yanjiao tribe did not have the Yi family's bloodline and his fire seed's flame was different from theirs. However, Yi Tuan's first impression of him was not out of place, just strange. But now was not the time to think about it. Questions could be left for later. Perhaps the kid was worried about being caught in the crossfire and ran away. What happened just now must have scared him. Many people from the Yi family thought so. Calm down. Yi Tuan shouted. This was to distract them from paying attention to anything else. After Yi Tuan's reprimand, the people guarding the formation calmed down. It was good that the tribesmen had left. They did not have to worry about him. They did not have to worry about an outsider becoming an unexpected factor in this battle, nor did they have to worry about Xiaofan appearing again. Did he think he could come and go as he pleased? Most of them would make ample preparations before entering this place. After all, it required a lot of energy, and it was easy for the mind to get tired. Although it was easier to exit than when they entered, it was not that easy. Only a small portion of the Yi family could enter this place. It was already a surprise that a tribesman could make it here. Leaving safely could only be considered lucky. The Yi family no longer thought about Xiaofan. Xiaofan's appearance and departure was like a pebble thrown into a vast lake. It only caused small ripples, not waves. On the other side, when Xiaofan opened his eyes, he felt dizzy for a moment. His vision darkened and his brain was very tired. It took him a while to recover. He looked around him. Cha-Cha was perched on a nearby cliff, one paw pressing down on a snake as thick as an adult's thigh. It was pecking at its food. This kind of snake was not considered big in this forest, but in this area, it was already a rare big snake. After all, there were very few beasts living in this mountain range. Noticing that Xiaofan was awake, Cha-Cha tossed the half-dead snake in front of Xiaofan and hissed twice. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired." Xiaofan patted Cha-Cha's bird head. He got up and slowly walked 2 steps. His feet stepped on the firm ground and he felt the strong support of the ground. This place was completely different from the void. Xiaofan looked at Yizong and Yi Qi. He saw that they were still sitting in the same position as before. However, the jade stones on the square plates in front of them had changed positions. The biggest difference was the Yi family totem where Yizong and Yi Qi were sitting. Compared to before, the arc of fire in the totem was bigger and brighter. The flames were also taller. Naturally, the pressure it gave off was greater. The slaves guarding near the two of them were also further away. Yizong and Yi Qi were among the people guarding the Yi family. Xiaofan did not find it strange that such a change would occur under the influence of 100 people. Xiaofan did not look at the two of them. He felt that he had used up too much energy. He went hunting with Cha-Cha in the distance to find food. After eating and drinking, he even slept for a long time. His fatigue had completely disappeared. Xiaofan thought for a moment and sat down again. He took out a straw rope and tried to enter the void using the 8-rope knot method. With his previous success, this time, Xiaofan only wasted 3 straw ropes. The dark void appeared again. With his previous experience, Xiaofan quickly steadied himself and suppressed the discomfort. Xiaofan had been thinking that he had already left to eat and sleep. By the time he returned, the two sides should be almost done fighting, right? But when Xiaofan looked over, Yi Xiang and Yi Tuan did not look much different from when he left. The two sides, who had just calmed down and prepared for battle, realized that the person who had just left had reappeared. Yi Tuan was about to throw out a bone divination when he froze. Yi Xiang, Yi Tuan, the Yi family. His aura was different from the Yi families, so the Yi family recognized him immediately. Why was he here again? How was this possible? The first time was a coincidence, a stroke of luck. What about the second time? They thought it was a stroke of luck to be able to enter this place and leave safely, that tribesmen would be able to brag about it. Who knew he would appear again? And this time, Xiaofan's figure was more solid, not as blurry as the first time. In fact, he looked similar to many of the Yi family guards. They would not believe that Xiaofan did not know how to enter this place. Sensing everyone's stares, Yizong and Yi Qi said in unison, "It wasn't us." They really did not tell Xiaofan how to enter this place. If not for the fact that the situation was not right and there was no time to explain, Yizong and Yi Qi would have sworn a long oath to prove their innocence. Everyone had just calmed down and prepared for battle when Xiaofan's sudden appearance and disappearance made them uneasy again. Especially Yi Tuan. Since when could a tribesman do things that even the Yi family could not do? Yi Xiong did not say anything, but he stopped what he was doing. Both sides stared at Xiaofan, who had reappeared. Xiaofan was also confused. The battle had not begun. Xiaofan had already noticed something strange about this place. He had left for so long, even had a meal and a nap. Why had the battle not begun yet? Xiaofan had a guess. This place was different from the real world. The time was different. Chapter 795. To verify his suspicions, Xiaofan decided to leave the dark world. The Yi family had not started fighting yet and Xiaofan felt that his reappearance had attracted the attention of the Yi family, especially Yi Xiong. Yi Xiong had been watching him ever since he appeared. Xiaofan only wanted to see how capable Yi Xiong was. He did not want to provoke Yi Xiong here. Even though he was surrounded by darkness, the atmosphere was too tense. Xiaofan didn't want to stay here and risk his life. He thought it would be better to wait until the two sides were almost done fighting before he came back. By then, both sides would have exhausted a lot of energy and wouldn't spend much time watching him. When he opened his eyes again, Xiaofan saw a pile of animal bones not far away. They were the remains of a snake that Cha-Cha had eaten. Before Xiaofan left and entered the dark world, Cha-Cha had just finished eating the snake. Recently, Cha-Cha had been eating snakes the most. Perhaps it was because he had almost been eaten by a snake when he first came to Eagle Mountain, but Cha-Cha had always been hostile toward snakes. He often caught snakes to eat in the forest and ate even more on the way to Eagle Mountain. Xiaofan remembered the snake bones not far away from Xiaofan. It had horns on both sides of its face and its skull had horns as well. This type of snake was rare and Xiaofan had only seen Cha-Cha eat it once before he entered the dark world. Therefore, the snake's skull not far away must be the one that Cha-Cha had eaten. Xiaofan felt that he hadn't been away for long this time. Although he had stopped for a while in that strange dark world to observe the people on both sides, it had only been about 10 minutes. But now, Xiaofan found that the blood on the snake's bones had changed color, and some of the remaining meat had begun to dry. According to the environment, it should have been nearly half a day since Cha-Cha finished eating the snake. As expected, the timing was off. Cha-Cha stood on top of the mountain wall, his pair of eagle eyes vigilantly staring at the surroundings. Yi Qi and Yizong were still in the same state as before. At least, they did not seem to have changed. Xiaofan changed his strategy this time. Since the time between the two parties was not equal and he did not know if there was a fixed pattern, he did not act rashly. He decided to wait for the two parties to start fighting before going over to observe the situation. Instead of going over to investigate again and again, it was better to keep an eye on Yi Qi and Yizong. This way, he could save a lot of energy. Time flowed slower in the dark world. Yizong and Yi Qi's changes might not appear quickly. Therefore, while waiting, Xiaofan began to explore the method of using his consciousness to control them. Since this method could allow him to enter places that ordinary people could not reach and see figures that others could not see, then, could he also discover other things? Xiaofan did not know if he could discover something new without entering the void. He could only try it himself. Xiaofan did not use the 8-rope knot method. Instead, he relied on the 2 times he had entered the dark world and the insights he had gained from the knots to explore on his own. Because he found that there were some similarities with the power of the ancestral bone ornaments, many of the key points were not difficult to understand. First, he had to find the bright white in his body. Perhaps it was similar to the legendary soul, a type of special life force that was based on the body. Because of his previous experience, Xiaofan did not spend too much time this time and found the bright white in his body. Next, Xiaofan used his consciousness to stimulate the power of the fire seed, using the bright white to find other similar existences. This time, Xiaofan did not use the power of Yanjiao's fire seed. Instead, he used a special power in his body that was similar to the power of the fire seed. In his sea of consciousness, a white line of fire appeared and surged towards the bright white. Then, it began to revolve around the bright white. Every time it revolved around the bright white, flames would appear. When the bright white was completely engulfed in flames, a spot of darkness appeared in the center. Then, the conspicuous black spot in the light gradually expanded to form a rotating black hole. When the black hole, which was engulfed in flames, expanded to the point where no flames could be seen, Xiaofan saw a dark world that was similar to the place where the Yi family had fought. However, this dark world was different from the one in the Yi family. Although it looked the same, Xiaofan felt that it was a completely different place. It was a similar dark world. It seemed that there was more than one such place. If possible, Xiaofan wanted to learn more about it from the Yi family. Upon closer inspection, Xiaofan realized that it was not completely dark. There were some faint spots of light, like looking at the stars in the sky when there were thin clouds. After sensing for a bit, Xiaofan realized that it was not dark to begin with. It was just that they were too far away. With a shift of his consciousness, Xiaofan realized that the things that were far away were starting to come closer. No, perhaps under the urging of his consciousness, he was rapidly approaching that place. As he got closer, the things that were originally not very clear became very clear. As long as Xiaofan maintained this level of perception, he could continue to see the clear spots of light in the darkness. Previously, he had not been able to see them clearly. Now that he was closer, he realized that there were many faint flashes of blue light surrounding these spots of light. The range was not small either. Xiaofan even felt as though he was standing in the middle of the universe. The aura of these spots of light gave Xiaofan a sense of familiarity. It was not the aura of any tribe that he knew of. It was the aura of a beast. On Chacha's body, there was a similar aura. Could it be something from Eagle Mountain? As Xiaofan continued to increase the intensity of his perception, he began to expend more and more energy. As his perception grew stronger, Xiaofan could see more. The faint blue lights were actually blue flames. Similar to Xiaofan's figure in this dark world, these blue flames also formed some strange shapes. For example, the bone-reading beasts used by the Yi family. Every spot of light represented a giant beast, and the figures formed by the blue flames were the rough outlines of the giant beasts. The spots of light at the core of these figures were not very close to each other. It was not that they were deliberately distancing themselves from each other, but that these giant beasts were simply too large. Even if they were piled up together, they would not be able to get close to each other. Even though the spots of light were not very close to each other, there were still a lot of them. From a distance, they looked like a galaxy of stars. Xiaofan did not count how many spots of light there were. His attention was now on the figures formed by the blue flames. These figures were huge. Even the bone-reading beasts used by Yi Tuan and the rest were like palms compared to them. Xiaofan had never hunted a giant beast like this in all his years of hunting. Other than the giant mountain eagles Xiaofan had seen on the icy peak, there was another species that was not a giant eagle. It was the terrifyingly large crocodile he had encountered in the river when he went to Gongjia Valley. However, even the giant eagle and the terrifying crocodile on the mountaintop were slightly inferior in front of these figures. There were too many figures stacked on top of each other. Xiaoxian couldn't separate them all at once. Although he could not see them clearly, Xiaoxian was sure they were not in the shape of a giant mountain eagle. He had used too much energy and it was difficult to continue. Xiaoxian retreated from the dark world first. He would take a closer look after he recovered some energy. Opening his eyes, Xiaoxian wiped the sweat off his face. His back was drenched in sweat from overexertion. The blue flame figures must be the true form of the giant beasts when they were alive. As he pondered, Xiaoxian turned to look at the mountain wall. Even with his special vision, he could only see thick rocks. Xiaoxian could not see anything on the other side of Eagle Mountain for now, so he could not know if there were giant skeletons at the foot of the mountain. He could only use his consciousness to enter another dark world to see what the naked eye could not see. Cha-Cha noticed Xiaoxian's abnormality and came over to call out worriedly. "I'm fine," Xiaoxian said as he stared at Cha-Cha. He looked at Cha-Cha carefully from head to toe, which confused Cha-Cha. "Ha!" Cha-Cha called out again. "Cha-Cha, do you know what your ancestors are? Do you know what they look like?" Xiaoxian asked. After hearing Xiaoxian's question, Cha-Cha paused for a moment, then looked up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that attracted his attention. Then, he looked around vigilantly, but didn't look at Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian was familiar with Cha-Cha's temperament. It was obviously avoiding the question. It did not want to answer Xiaoxian's question. Of course, it knew what the ancestor looked like. That was a secret of the giant mountain eagles. Only the eagles that had entered Eagle Mountain knew about it. Chapter 796. Cha-Cha didn't want to answer, so Xiaoxian didn't force him to answer. Xiaoxian knew from the Hui tribe that the great mountain eagles had many secrets. They didn't even bring anyone with them to Eagle Mountain. It was rare for Xiaoxian to follow a great mountain eagle to Eagle Mountain, and that was because he was raised by Xiaoxian and this was his first time going to Eagle Mountain. Otherwise, other eagles wouldn't have allowed humans to follow them. Even if someone found Eagle Mountain, they might not be able to climb to the highest peak of the icefield. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to fly with the great mountain eagles to the real Eagle Mountain. It was just like Xiaoxian's situation back then. This tall and long mountain range was only a barrier. The real Eagle Mountain was where Xiaoxian saw the eagles flying after the mist on the peak of the icefield dispersed. The real Eagle Mountain was even taller than this mountain range. He couldn't see the top or the bottom. No one knew what was at the bottom of Eagle Mountain. However, if he explored it on a spiritual level through the special world of darkness, distance and barriers would no longer be a problem. After a short rest and some food, Xiaoxian glanced over at Yizong and Yizong. He noticed that the Yi family totem was brighter than before. However, that was the only difference. There weren't any obvious changes. Looking away, Xiaoxian decided to check out the figures that he suspected to be the ancestors of the great mountain eagles. With his previous success, Xiaoxian entered the world of darkness even faster this time. He walked up to the figures made of blue flames and counted them carefully. The number was astonishing. Many. Too many. Thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, or even more. Although the figures made of blue flames contained life energy, it was different from the life energy of real living creatures. It was closer to the bone-reading beasts used by the Yi family. Of course, they were only similar in nature and weren't exactly the same. Moreover, the strength of life energy of these giant figures was very different from that of the Yi family's bone-reading beasts. These figures made of blue flames had greater life energy. They were like scattered fire seeds stacked together, just like the Yi family's formation. Countless figures of giant beasts were stacked together like firewood, emitting an ancient aura. The soul of Eagle Mountain. This word suddenly popped into Xiaoxian's mind. He tried to identify the individual giant beasts, but they were stacked so tightly together that he couldn't see them clearly. However, Xiaofan had a rough idea of their general shape. They were indeed different from the giant mountain eagles, but they were somewhat similar to the small pterosaur he got out of the ice. The Cha-Cha didn't want to tell him any secrets about Eagle Mountain, but Xiaofan was almost certain that these giant beasts were the secret of Eagle Mountain. They were the ancestors of the giant mountain eagles, the real ancient giant beasts. They were also one of the overlords that once ruled the world. Perhaps, the time they existed was the era that the pterosaur that had survived from the ice was familiar with. A long time ago, when the Yanjiao tribe was still trapped on the other side of the boundless river and isolated from the rest of the world, Xiaofan heard from the shaman that the giant mountain eagles had their own beliefs. They couldn't be tamed, and they couldn't accept the power of fire seeds from other tribes. Perhaps these giant mountain eagles were the beliefs of the giant mountain eagles. Generations of giant mountain eagles flew thousands of miles to Eagle Mountain. No matter if it was a young eagle or an old eagle that came here for the first time, they would all be reborn after coming here. It was similar to the awakening of totemic power or leveling up of totemic warriors. Many of these changes might have been caused by the stacked blue figures. These blue figures formed the fire pit of the giant mountain eagles, and they were the real core of the entire Eagle Mountain. When he first saw the frozen pterosaur, Xiaofan wondered where the giant beasts that once ruled the world and trampled humans at the bottom of the food chain had gone. Many tribes had records of their ancestors that recorded and preserved the ancient history, but there were very few records about the ancient era. Many tribes with a long history had the same story, but it was from the perspective of the tribe's fire seed. It was said that a long, long time ago, humans were still prey to the beasts. They weren't strong enough, and it was the fire seed that gave them power. It was the fire seed that brought humans to where they were today. No one knew what happened in the ancient times, but based on the evidence he found, he was sure that the fire seed had indeed changed the world. However, it wasn't just humans that changed the world. Every living thing in the world was changed too. Perhaps humans were the smartest, and they were the first to understand the use of the fire seed. The soul of Eagle Mountain was one of the pieces of evidence. Eagle Mountain wasn't the only place in the world that was similar to it. As for the other similar secret places that were unknown to the public, it was still unknown where they were. The world was so big that they only knew a corner of this forest. There were many more places that humans hadn't explored yet, but Xiaofan had a feeling that they would come across them in the future. It was just a hunch. His head started to hurt, and he used up too much energy, so Xiaofan left the world of darkness. As soon as he opened his eyes, Xiaofan sensed the fluctuations of the fire seed's power. He looked at Yizong and the other man. The totemic flames that had been brightening were fluctuating, dimming for a moment, then brightening again. It had begun. For such fluctuations to occur, the two sides must have started fighting. As Xiaofan rested, he observed Yizong and the other man's totemic flames. When Yizong and the other man's totemic flames weakened, the battle would have ended and Xiaofan could go over to check it out. In the dark, empty world where the Yi family resided. After Xiaofan disappeared again, Yixiang, who had been watching the Yi family, turned slightly to look at where Xiaofan had appeared. After staring for a while, Yixiang made his move. His hand that had been holding the string of wooden ornaments began to move. His movements were small and could be missed if one wasn't paying attention. Yi Tuan, who had been watching Yixiang cautiously, was surprised. Others might not be able to tell, but he knew what Yixiang was doing. Yixiang was performing a divination. Why was he performing a divination at a time like this? And the target of the divination could be the missing Yanjiao. Regardless of who Yixiang's target was or why he was doing it, Yi Tuan had no time to think about it. He decided to seize this opportunity. Everything else could wait. The only thing they wanted to do now was to find a chance to deal with Yixiang. Without further ado, Yi Tuan roared, "Go!" Almost at the same time, the three Yi family elders, including Yi Tuan, attacked. 4 bright spots flew out from each of their hands. Just like the bone-reading beast, these spots transformed into giant beasts as they flew past the flames. Some were slender, some were heavy, some had carapaces, and some were like meteors with fireballs. These balls were images projected from the stones used for divination. Yi Tuan and the others had made ample preparations before this. It was evident from the timing and momentum of their attacks. Under the aura created by the three of them, it gave people the feeling of a river flowing into the sea. 12 beasts and stones projected by bone, carapaces and stones shot towards Yi Xiang. The combined power of the three elders was astounding. Even in this dark void, it brought about a gust of wind. Among the people guarding the formation, those who were slightly weaker all had their breathing disrupted at this moment. Their chests were oppressed, and they could only feel the tremors under their feet. Their legs were numb for a moment, and their chests were oppressed. It was as if there was not enough air to breathe. Yi Xiang did not panic at the sudden attack. He did not move or turn around, one hand still holding the wooden ornaments. Facing the Yi family, he raised his other arm towards the arc of fire in the totem, as though he was casually shaking off dust from his sleeve. He waved his arm downwards, pointing at the arc of fire not far away. The moment Yi Xiang swung his arm down, the arc of fire on the totem suddenly flared up as if someone had poured oil on it. The flames grew 10 times bigger. By then, the bone-reading beasts had reached them. They did not slow down in the face of the wall of fire, charging straight into it. The moment they collided, there was a sudden explosion of power. The wall of fire in the arc of fire in front of Yi Xiang spewed out like lava from a volcano, its aura spreading outwards. As the attacks of the bone-reading beasts and the bone-reading stones collided, booming sounds rang out continuously. The fire wall formed by the elongated flames was like a sturdy city wall, blocking the concentrated attacks. The flickering of the flames was no longer the sound of a normal bonfire being blown by the wind, but more like the hysterical roar of a ferocious beast. The blossoming heatwave swept up the exploding sparks and splashed in all directions, flying as far as the eye could see. If one could see the expressions on everyone's faces, they would have noticed the change in Yi Tuan and the other two's eyes. When they launched their attack, their eyes were burning with anticipation, hoping that this attack would work. Even if they could not seriously injure Yi Xiang, just inflicting some damage on him would be enough for them to be excited. But very quickly, the anticipation in their eyes and the flames of desire in their hearts were mostly extinguished. What replaced it was shock, intense disappointment, and sorrow that was beginning to spread. It was just that no one knew about this. This was the first large-scale collision between the two sides. There was no sand or pebbles here, but everyone felt like they were in the middle of a storm, their bodies about to fall apart. The bone-reading beasts attacked in a frenzy, determined to break through the wall even at the cost of their own lives. At their peak, one of the beasts opened its mouth, only an arm's length away from Yi Xiang. That was how ferocious and frenzied their attacks were. But unlike the fire path, Yi Xiang was calm on the other side of the fire path. Not a single spark flew in his direction. Even when the bone-reading beasts were only an arm's length away, he did not make any extra movements. After waving his hand, he continued what he was doing, as if he did not notice anything. He was just defending, not even glancing at Yi Tuan. Yi Xiang maintained his posture, as if the combined attack of the three did not matter at all. Ignored. Blatant disdain. Yi Tuan and the others were already furious when they heard him say, "Your generation is not good." Now, he was using reality to prove to the Yi family that he was not lying. This was Yi Xiang, the one the Yi family had failed to kill back then. The Yi family was unlucky. On the other side, when Xiaofan noticed that the totemic flames around Yi Zong and Yi Tuan were beginning to change, he did not divert his attention to anything else. Instead, he kept watch. The totemic flames around Yizong and Yi Tuan grew stronger at first, then began to ripple violently. The two Yizong and Yi Tuan seemed to be under great pressure, their bones creaking and their veins popping under their skin. Looks like the Yi family is not doing too well either, Xiaofan thought. This situation lasted for 3 days before the totemic flames around Yizong and Yi Tuan slowed down. It's over? Xiaofan secretly guessed, but immediately denied it. It shouldn't be so soon. He had waited here for 3 days, but on the other side, not much time had passed. Perhaps the clash between the two sides had just come to an end. Should he go over and take a look? Let's see if the Yi family has the upper hand, or if the mysterious unlucky has the upper hand. Xiaofan had been waiting for the past few days, keeping himself in good condition, ready to enter the world of darkness again at any time. Chapter 797. Xiaofan had just appeared in this dark world ere the Yi family was fighting when he felt a wave of heat wash over him. His vision was filled with balls of fire. Without thinking too much, he mobilized the power of his fire seed and used it as a shield to block the large balls of flames that were smashing towards him like a group of meteors. Judging from the situation, the Yi family must have fought at least once while he was away. While he was thinking, a spear of fire shot towards Xiaofan. Sensing the approaching danger, Xiaofan did not have time to think. His body reflexively took 2 steps back. The spear of orange-red flames almost brushed past Xiaofan. Xiaofan could even feel the scorching heat from the spear. It felt like he would have been burned if he had been 1 step slower. "You're finally here." A slightly hoarse and indifferent voice rang out. Xiaofan looked up. It was Yi Xiong. But unlike his previous nonchalant tone, Yi Xiong's words were laced with murderous intent. The center of the battlefield looked calm, but anyone could tell that a large-scale battle had just taken place here. There were several bone-reading beasts on the Yi family side. There were also some balls of fire that he could not identify. There were a total of 12 of them. Even though he could not see their faces, Xiaofan could sense the tension in the Yi family's camp. It was obvious that they had not had the upper hand in the previous battles. Even though they looked powerful and imposing, they could not hide their anxiety. Their morale was unstable and they lacked confidence. Yi Xiong was still standing there alone. He did not look much different from when Xiaofan left last time. If not for the fact that Xiaofan had been keeping an eye on the Yi family's situation, keeping an eye on Yizong's movements even when he was not here, and seeing the scattered balls of fire when he arrived, no one would have thought that Yi Xiong had just fought someone. Unlike the commotion in the Yi family camp, Yi Xiong looked too calm, so calm that it sent chills down everyone's spines. The Yi family did not pay much attention to Xiaofan's appearance. Right now, most of them were not in the mood to think about this tribesman who came and went as he pleased. Only Yi Tuan had looked at Xiaofan for a few seconds when he appeared. After that, they stared at Yi Xiong warily, waiting for his next move. Yi Tuan's heart was bitter and sorrowful. He did not know Yi Xiong's true strength from the earlier clash, but he had a rough idea. Yi Xiong was indeed much stronger than they had imagined. The 100 of them would not be able to do anything to Yi Xiong, much less gain the upper hand. Yi Tuan also felt that the once powerful Yi family was beginning to decline. Beneath their prosperous facade, they were now so weak. Yi Tuan could not refute Yi Xiong's words when he first appeared. Yi Xiong's "Your generation is no good" was the first slap in the face. They wanted to retaliate, but reality proved that they were slapped again, and this time it was even more painful. As for Xiaofan, Yi Tuan did not expect Xiaofan to be able to defeat Yi Xiong. If they could not do it, this tribesman was even worse. However, they might be able to use this tribesman's appearance to their advantage. While Yi Tuan's mind was in turmoil, Yi Xiong paid no attention to the Yi family camp. Instead, he was staring at Xiaofan. Xiaofan felt two sharp glints shooting out of Yi Xiong's eyes. This person was coming for him. Murderous intent. Even more so than the Yi family camp. Xiaofan, why was there such a deep grudge? Yi Xiong had caused trouble for Rock Hill City and turned Xiaofan into a zombie. Of course, Yi Xiong would not treat Xiaofan kindly. However, Xiaofan did not think that his grudge with Yi Xiong was greater than the Yi family. After all, it was the Yi family who forced Yi Xiong to flee to another mainland. Even Yi Si had said that if Yi Xiong attacked the Yi family, he would annihilate the entire family. He did not care that they were all from the same tribe. But now, Yi Xiong seemed to want to kill Xiaofan more than the Yi family. Xiaofan only wanted to use the Yi family's war to see how powerful the legendary Yi Xiong was, and to see how capable the people behind Rock Hill City were. But who knew that they would encounter such a situation? When he first came here, Yi Xiong did not react this way. Did something unexpected happen while he was away? Xiaofan's suspicions were mixed with his wariness. He planned to escape. So be it. His previous plan was based on the assumption that Yi Xiong would hate the Yi family even more. But now, Yi Xiong's target was Xiaofan himself. Xiaofan did not need to stay here any longer. This was the Yi family's main battlefield, not his. He would be an idiot to fight the Yi family here. However, after trying a few times with his consciousness, Xiaofan realized that the method he used to leave this place was completely useless now. He couldn't get out. Since you're here, you might as well stay. Yi Xiong's voice sounded like it was blown by the desert wind. He was like a predator hiding in the desert, finally baring his fangs. Yi Xiong's nonchalant attitude changed. Before he even finished speaking, he had already started moving, not giving Xiaofan, Yi Tuan and the rest any time to react. In front of Yi Xiong, the wall of fire that the bone-reading beasts could not pass through suddenly surged upwards, like a volcano that had been brewing for a long time and was about to erupt. With the wall of fire as its center, powerful flames flowed. Orange-red with hints of white spread rapidly in all directions. Spread, spread again. The real storm was finally coming. Just the spreading flames were like a raging river, forcing the bone-reading beasts to retreat. In comparison, Yi Xiong's behavior in the previous battle was nothing but mild. Sharp, powerful. Murderous without a trace of hesitation. This was the Yi Xiong now, or perhaps, the real Yi Xiong. Even though they could not see Yi Tuan and the rest's expressions, it was clear how shocked they were. However, what shocked them even more was yet to come. The wall of fire under Yi Xiong's control that seemed to connect heaven and earth began to change from top to bottom. At the top of the wall of fire expanded outwards like a giant umbrella. Below them, waves of fire spread in all directions. "Oh no!" Yi Tuan shouted. "He's going to trap us all here." Another person beside Yi Tuan exclaimed. Those who came were the best of the Yi family's main branch, or people of high status. If none of them made it back, Yi Tuan did not dare to imagine what would happen to the Yi family. The balance of the royal city was supported by the strength of the 6 tribes. If any of them weakened, the other 5 tribes would turn into wolves and pounce on the weak prey, not giving it time to breathe or rise again. Yi Tuan only had one word in his mind: extermination. Yi Xiong really did want to exterminate the entire family. Yi Xiong had delayed his attack until now because he was waiting for Xiaofan to come out, then trap Xiaofan and the Yi family here. Yi Tuan did not know why Yi Xiong targeted Xiaofan. He only wanted to send the Yi family out. Even if he could only send 1/10 of them out, it would reduce the Yi family's losses. Yi Xiong seemed to have transformed into another person. Although they could not see Yi Xiong's face clearly, anyone who looked at him would feel as though they had encountered a ferocious storm. In the world of darkness, Yi Xiang's wall of fire seemed to envelop the entire world. "Retreat!" Yi Tuan shouted. But it was too late. They could not leave. The Yi family also realized this. Xiaofan wanted to run when he saw the spreading waves of fire beneath his feet. But no matter how fast he ran, he seemed to be stuck in the same spot, trapped with the Yi family. The world under the control of consciousness was different from the real world. Just like when Xiaofan discovered the giant creatures in Eagle Mountain, distance was a blur. Retreat? There was no way out. The umbrella-like fire shield above the wall of fire was already covering them, connecting with the flames beneath their feet to form an enclosed space. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. They were like prey trapped in a cage, waiting to be slaughtered. Helplessness, powerlessness, despair. Yi Xiang's figure formed by flames became clearer, even his facial expressions were detailed. Everyone's faces could not be seen because of the flames. But now, Yi Xiang's facial features became clearer. They could see the shape of his eyes, nose, mouth and even the slightest movement of his sleeves. It was far clearer than Yi Tuan and the rest's images. That was why Yi Xiang had not used his full strength in the previous battle. He had only defended, not attacked. Yi Tuan and the other two could not harm Yi Xiang at all even with the help of the 100-man formation. Now, they could not do anything to Yi Xiang, unless they used other means. In the dark world, Yi Xiang stood there, his aura strong, cold and domineering. It was as if he was the only one in control of this sealed world, the true ruler. If not for the fact that the Yi family were the ones being slaughtered, they would have instinctively feared Yi Xiang. Unfortunately, this person showed no mercy to the Yi family. This frightened the Yi family, but they could not muster the will to resist. Xiaofan finally felt like he had dug his own grave. Chapter 798. When the flames from above and below sealed the area, Xiaofan suddenly felt a chill seeping out from his bones. Although it was the flames that sealed the area, he felt like he was in an ice cave. His blood and energy were flowing at a slower speed. Especially the energy and energy flow needed to leave this area. It was clearly frozen. If the energy in his body could not complete this flow, he would not be able to leave this dark world. Xiaofan looked at the floor of flames beneath his feet. This had sealed off any chance of escape. He knew that Yi Xiang wanted to seal him and the 100 people from the Yi family here. Xiaofan and the rest of the Yi family were like vegetables in a pot, while Yi Xiang was the one adding fuel to the fire. Thinking of this, Xiaofan could not help but shiver. He could not understand why Yi Xiang was so hostile towards him. Yi Xiang did not even look at Yi Tuan and the rest. Xiaofan would be lying if he said he did not regret putting himself in this predicament. But there was no time for regrets. Instead of thinking about this, he might as well use the time to think of a way out of this predicament. Xiaofan looked at the Yi family. He did not know this place well and might not be able to think of an effective way out in such a short period of time. However, the Yi family should be familiar with this place. So, what would the Yi family do in this situation? If the Yi family could come up with an effective plan, Xiaofan would know what to work on even if he could not replicate the Yi family's abilities. Of course, Xiaofan would not place all his hopes on the Yi family. He was also thinking hard about how to get out of this predicament. The sealed area was divided into two parts, with the fire wall in front of Yi Xiang as the boundary. Yi Xiang stood on one side while Xiaofan and the rest of the Yi family stood on the other. However, Xiaofan was alone and did not have as strong a presence as Yi Xiang. So, at first glance, it looked like there were only two sides facing off, Yi Xiang and the Yi family. The Yi family reacted quickly. Even though the Yi family was less experienced and less capable, Yi Tuan and the other two had already considered the situation. They came up with multiple guesses, but no matter which one they chose, they were not confident. In the end, Yi Tuan chose the most conservative option. He did not plan to fight Yi Xiong to the death with these 100 people. He decided to leave first. This was the first time they had a clear understanding of Yi Xiong's abilities. After they left, they had to think of other ways to stop Yi Xiong from wiping out the entire family. Yi Xiong was already on the move. The wall of fire, which looked like a heavenly wall, was no longer in a defensive position. As Yi Xiong pushed his palm forward, the wall of fire charged forward with the ferocity of 10,000 beasts. It was as if nothing in its path could stop it, as if it wanted to crush and flatten everything in its path. Not just one or two bone-reading beasts, but an entire wall of fire. In such a sealed space, there was simply no chance for anyone to escape. Even though this was not a physical body, Xiaoxian's back was drenched in sweat from nervousness. He looked at the wall of fire that was closing in on him. There was no way he could escape. He turned to look at the Yi family. As expected, the people at the front were starting to move. This time, Yi Tuan and the other two did not use their bone-reading beasts. Yi Tuan raised a hand, holding something that looked like a tortoise shell. Croc croc croc, a series of collisions rang out, as if hard objects like bones were colliding with each other. Yi Tuan shouted, reaching forward with the tortoise shell. In the next instant, the tortoise shell in his hand shone brightly. It was not a speck of light like the bone-reading beasts, but a ball of light. The ball of light shot forward like a shooting star. Along the way, the ball of light rapidly changed. Break! In that instant, Xiaoxian felt as if a mountain was crashing down on him. The pressure on his body was increasing at an alarming rate. Whoosh! The sound of wind whipping the flames seemed to spread to every corner of the world. Even the pressure from Yi Xiong's wall of fire was pushed aside. Rumble! The sound of wind and fire changed into a thunderous roar. Everything around him was shaking. Xiaoxian's entire body was swaying. In his field of vision, endless flames spewed out from the ball of light. The flames intertwined in the sky, and in the midst of the flames, a huge figure rushed out. Xiaoxian stared in shock at the enormous creature. Was that a tortoise? Unlike the tortoises Xiaoxian had seen before, the tortoise that appeared in front of him had a slender body. Its neck and tail were much longer than the tortoises Xiaoxian was familiar with. There were some thorns behind its neck and many protruding thorns on its tail. Its shell was undulating like hills, unlike the snapping tortoise in the Flaming Horns tribe, which had a sharp, jagged back. Instead, it had a heavy feeling like a mountain. Its form was secondary. What shocked Xiaoxian was its size. It was huge. It was almost the same size as the giant beasts Xiaoxian had seen at Eagle Mountain. Yi Tuan's bone-reading beasts could not even compare to a single claw of this giant tortoise. An ancient giant beast. This was Xiaoxian's first thought. The Yi family actually had something like this. In fact, the Yi family did not have many tools made from the bones of ancient giant beasts. In fact, they were considered rare. The Yi family's divination tools were all made by themselves or with the help of others. Only a few were passed down from their ancestors. The one Yi Tuan was using was one of the rare artifacts passed down from their ancestors. There had been some ancestral artifacts, but most of them had been destroyed after being used in some incident. This was one of the most precious artifacts passed down from generation to generation. Tribes without fire pits had special burial grounds for their tribesmen, which was their tribe's graveyard. Of the 6 major tribes in the royal city, the other 5 had their own graveyard. The Yi family was an exception. Although they had their own graveyard, many of them preferred to find their own graves. The more capable a person was, the more likely they were to find their own graves. When they felt that their time was up, they would leave the tribe, and the artifacts they had would be buried with them. Just like how the Ji family prepared grain in their graves, the Yi family's necessities were their own tools for divination. There were very few people who had the ability to find the grave of one of the Yi family's ancestors, the courage to dig up their graves, and the ability to control the dead artifacts. This was also the reason why the Yi family did not have many ancestral oracles. Yi Xiong was right when he said that their generation was not capable. Their divination tools were not as good as their ancestors. This was also a reflection of their strength. Even Yi Tuan, who held a high position in the Yi family, had to give up on his own bone divination and take out his ancestor's artifact. Yi Xiong's body did not look strong, but it was powerful enough to force Yi Tuan to take out his ancestor's artifact. The palm-sized tortoiseshell could only be seen at a time like this. The giant tortoise opened its mouth and stretched its neck, its throat moving. An ancient and vigorous roar that Xiaofan had never heard before came out of its mouth. It carried an insufferably domineering aura, as if it had traversed through endless time and space. Witnessing this scene with his own eyes was more shocking than anything recorded in any tribe's ancestral records. Along with the roar, an immense pressure seemed to erupt. Xiaofan felt the pressure around him increase exponentially. A huge force was crashing down on him. Under this pressure, Xiaofan felt like a grasshopper that couldn't jump up. He could be crushed to death in the next moment. Xiaofan forced himself to look up, only to see the giant tortoise propping up its four limbs and running forward due to inertia. Then, the moment before it collided with the wall of fire, it raised its two front limbs to block the wall of fire. Boom! The two giant tortoise feet stomped heavily on the ground. The entire tortoise's body shook violently, the flames that made up its body splashing everywhere. As for the wall of fire, it exploded with countless sparks. The sealed flames under the giant tortoise's feet trembled violently as it stomped on the ground. Like boiling water, the flames splashed upwards with gurgling sounds. Within the sealed area, the flames on the wall of fire and the ground under their feet splashed with the tremors. The intertwining flames seemed to cover the sky and the sun. The giant tortoise's roar seemed to bring people into a strange ancient battlefield. Xiaofan's entire body suddenly bent under the pressure of the collision between the two sides. Then, with great difficulty, he straightened his back bit by bit. In front of him, one side was a powerful freak, and the other side was an ancient giant beast that had been released. Under the collision of the two, everything else would be reduced to cannon fodder. Xiaofan was about to become cannon fodder under the endless roaring flames. Xiaofan seemed to hear the bones in his body creaking under the heavy pressure. Even though Xiaofan was not close to the center of the battlefield, just the enormous aura and pressure, as well as the shockwaves caused by the collision between the two, were enough to easily crush him. The sound of wind and fire was like a war drum beating in his ears. Above his head, below his feet, and all around his body, there was an enormous pressure and shockwaves that could tear people apart. His vision was filled with flying flames, densely packed. Xiaofan could no longer see the giant tortoise's figure clearly. He felt as if he was standing in the middle of magma at the mouth of a volcano. Scorching heat waves were rolling all around him. Strong winds whistled, like red-hot knives hanging on his body. Every breath he took was like a fire burning in his nasal cavity. It was as if all the pores on his body were wide open and steam was spewing out. The pressure around him was still increasing. The pressure his body could withstand was about to exceed its limit. If this continued, Xiaofan would only have one outcome, death. Unless he could forcefully hack out a sliver of a chance to live under such enormous pressure and energy fluctuations. He had to think of a way. The Yi family's countermeasure was to use the giant tortoise to resist Yi Xiong's wall of fire. Xiaofan, on the other hand, had to think of a way to survive, not to mention leaving. Should he use the bone-reading beast like the Yi family? Xiaofan did not have a bone-reading beast, but he had an ancestor. Chapter 799. Under the immense pressure, Xiaofan felt like he was in a predicament of ice and fire. On the outside, there were scorching heat waves and flames. On the inside, it was as if his blood had been frozen. No matter what he wanted to do now, the first thing he had to do was to circulate the power that seemed to have been frozen in his body. This was a different world from the physical world. It was a world of spirit and consciousness. Spirit, consciousness, that bright spot. That bright white spot in his sea of consciousness was the core that allowed Xiaofan to stand here. Xiaofan controlled the seemingly frozen white power that was different from Yanjiao's fire seed and slowly broke the ice. 1 round, 2 rounds, when the white power began to recover, Xiaofan could clearly feel that his body, which was originally as cold as ice, began to warm up. However, this situation did not last for long. The power that had just started to become active seemed sluggish again. It was as if melted water had started to freeze again under low temperatures. Again. There was no time to breathe. He had to follow closely. If he wanted to break the ice, he had to break it all the way. Otherwise, if he stopped for even a moment, he would end up frozen again. Xiaofan controlled the white power and slowly circulated it around the bright white spot that was surrounded by the flames. Some of the frozen white power began to circulate again. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. It was as if the surrounding ice was melting again. As the white power circulated again, Xiaofan could feel that the cold in his body was beginning to weaken. The frozen power was gradually recovering. Faster. Faster. Fireballs of various sizes came crashing down from all directions like a group of meteorites. They directly smashed into Xiaofan's body and exploded into brilliant flames. Pain? He could no longer feel it. He was numb. Xiaofan gritted his teeth and endured the huge impact. If this was normal ground, his legs would have sunk into the ground already. However, the flames beneath his feet were responsible for sealing him so he could not sink any further. If this continued, Xiaofan would be crushed to the ground. Xiaofan did not have much time to slowly thaw. His body was close to the limit of what it could withstand. If he could not mobilize his power in a short period of time to block the impact of the external force, Xiaofan would only end up dead. He had to seize the time to control the thawing power in his body, guiding the heat to circulate. Meanwhile, on the Yi family side, Yi Tuan was in no mood to check on Xiaofan's situation. He had even forgotten that there was a tribesman here. Perhaps in his heart, he already thought that Xiaofan had been reduced to cannon fodder. There was only one thought in Yi Tuan's mind. He was trying to find a crack. This was Yi Tuan's plan too. He took out his ancestor's bone oracle. His purpose was not only to block the wall of fire, but also to borrow the strength of the wall of fire and the power created by the bone oracle to break the barrier that was restricting them, even if it was just a thin crack. If Yi Xiang could create a crack in this cage-like boundary, they would be able to escape through it. It did not need to be big, as long as there was a small crack. The boundary would not be completely sealed and they would be able to escape. A crack. Where was the crack? Yi Tuan tried his best to find a crack, afraid that he would miss it. But to his disappointment, there was none. The boundary was still intact, without a single scratch. How was this possible? They had taken out the bone oracle left behind by their ancestors. It could be said that this was the strongest bone oracle they had at the moment, but there was not a single crack in it. What did this mean? This meant that Yi Xiang's power had far exceeded their expectations. The giant tortoise blocking the wall of fire could only hold on for a while. Yi Tuan had no idea how long it could last. Reality hit him again and again, causing the usually calm Yi Tuan to panic. If even the oracle bone objects left behind by their ancestors were unable to give them a chance to escape, then what should they do to avoid being completely annihilated? Yi Tuan racked his brains for a solution. The Yi family was quick-witted and could think of many things in an instant. Even so, Yi Tuan could not come up with a satisfactory solution. It was not just Yi Tuan. The two elders beside Yi Tuan did not rest either. Their brains were probably the most active they had ever been in their lives. What should they do? Just as they were racking their brains, a strange energy wave appeared from another direction. Yi Tuan couldn't help glancing over. His heart raced at the sight of the figure. A powerful aura suddenly appeared, pressing down on the surroundings. Xiaofan controlled all the power in his body, circulating it according to a specific rule, sparing no expense. The thawed power gathered together, surging out like a tidal wave. Amidst the roars of wind and fire caused by the confrontation between the two heroes, in the world of orange-red flames, a crimson flame that was clearly of a different color suddenly rushed up. It was as if a bolt of lightning had suddenly split open, forcibly squeezing out a gap in this world. A huge figure formed in the middle of the crimson flame, like a battle-axe in a sea of fire. Its rising aura turned into a whirlwind, shattering all obstacles around it. Amidst the twisting, orange-red and crimson waves of fire, the gigantic figure that appeared once again expanded. Around the gigantic figure, the crimson waves of fire that emerged savagely attacked the surroundings, as if they were a ferocious beast that was crazily expanding its territory. Amidst the crisscrossing flames, amidst the spiritual awareness of the Yi family, the huge figure was like an alien, a demon that crawled out of hell. Yi Xiang was not the only one to notice. He had been looking in Xiaofan's direction the entire time, not giving Yi Tuan any extra attention. He did not show any signs of surprise, as if he had expected this. Bone-reading beast? Why does he have a bone-reading beast? Someone in the totem array exclaimed. Doesn't he have the ability to read grass? Where did he get it from? That's... Yi Zong exclaimed. That appeared when Yanjiao left. However, this one was even bigger than the flame giant he had seen before. It was as big as the giant tortoise. Back then, Yi Zong and the Royal City Army had chased after Yanjiao's migration team. They had been stopped by the flame giant and had not been able to catch up in time. In the end, Yanjiao's team had retreated from the mainland. That's the flame giant you mentioned before? Yi Tuan was confused. Wasn't the flame giant Yi Zong had seen corporeal? Why would it appear here? Corporeal? The power of bone-reading beast could be corporeal, but it was different from the one in the spiritual world. It was controlled differently and required more power. To the Yi family, a materialized bone-reading beast was too wasteful. All they needed to do was attack a person's consciousness, there was no need to materialize it. Some in the Yi family recalled the flame giant Yi Zong had mentioned when he returned with the Royal City Army. Back then, some had suspected that it was similar to a corporeal bone-reading beast. However, no one believed that a crude tribesman could have such power, much less the Yi family's control method. So, that's really a giant? How did the tribesman do it? When he first appeared, his figure was blurry. Where did he get the power to control such a huge giant? Also, what kind of person did the Yanjiao tribe use to make such a terrifying thing? Did such a giant really exist? No, he's not using bone reading. That's different from bone reading. Yi Tuan stared, many thoughts running through his mind. After calming down, Yi Tuan could tell if it was bone reading. Bone reading, regardless of whether it was a human or a beast, would have its own unique energy waves. However, they did not feel any aura or energy waves from Xiaofan at all. If it was not bone reading, then what was it? Even the bone oracle in their hands, although it was left behind by their ancestors, their heirs had been using the best bone oracle to raise it. Only then could this bone oracle be used to its fullest potential. But, a mere tribesman, what exactly did he have in his hands? What did he rely on? The giant tortoise that was blocking the wall of fire raised its head and roared. The tortoise's palms that came into contact with the wall of fire and stepped on the barrier at the bottom shook violently. Countless flames once again exploded from the wall of fire and the barrier at the bottom. Accompanying this was a tremor that could make people fall apart. The Yi family had a giant totemic formation protecting them. Even if there was a tremor, the impact would be greatly reduced. Before this, Xiaoxian was the one who was affected the most. However, at this moment, Xiaoxian's figure stood firmly in the middle of the flame giant that had suddenly appeared. With the pressure gone, Xiaoxian had a rare moment to catch his breath. However, Yi Xiang did not intend to give Xiaoxian the chance to recover. He raised his arm and swung it at Xiaoxian. As Yi Xiang swung his arm, the wall of fire, which had been stopped by the giant tortoise, surged towards Xiaoxian like a flood breaking through a dam. Xiaoxian could feel the overwhelming pressure coming at him, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. He could not retreat, there was no way out. Under the impact of the orange-red waves of fire, the huge crimson figure took a few steps back from the initial impact and slowly stabilized itself. Then, step by step, it walked forward. The giant's body was surrounded by waves of fire. It was difficult for him to move. Every step he took was accompanied by a huge impact, as if he was going against the current. Chapter 800. The torrent of flames grew stronger. Xiaoxian could feel the resistance in front of him increasing. Every step was heavier. The most obvious sign of this was that the ground shook violently with every step the flame giant took. The torrent of flames suddenly split into several streams, rising up like fire snakes and rushing towards the flame giant. The crimson figure waved its arms, its huge palms carrying a ferocious aura. There were no fancy tricks, its movements were not as clumsy as its size suggested. It was fast, direct and domineering, pressing down on the oncoming fire snakes. It was as if no creature could escape from its palms. All the fire snakes exploded at the same time. The fire snakes shattered into countless balls of fire, scattering in all directions. The wind created by the flame giant's arms swept away the flames in front of Xiaoxian. Yi Tuan stared blankly at the moving red figure. He still could not understand. What was Xiaoxian's giant? He could only vaguely sense that it was different from the bone-reading beasts they used. A giant of this size should not exist in this world. Perhaps there was another reason for its size? But Yi Tuan did not dwell on it. He did not have time to think about Xiaoxian's flame giant. He was also shocked by Xiaoxian's strong vitality. He thought that the tribesmen would have disappeared in the battle between the giant tortoise and Yi Xiang. But now, not only was Xiaoxian alive and kicking, he was even causing such a huge commotion. Was this the chance of survival that had finally appeared as he had divined before? His ancestor's bone oracle could not create a crack in the boundary. Then what about the tribesmen? Would they see a chance of survival in the midst of danger? At this thought, Yi Tuan focused again, searching for any possible cracks in the boundary. They would retreat as soon as a crack appeared. He could see that Yi Xiang was more hostile towards Xiaoxian than them. Even without looking, he could sense that Yi Xiang had diverted more forces to deal with the tribesmen. Yi Tuan admitted that Xiaoxian's flame giant was impressive and powerful. It might not lose to their ancestor's bone oracle, but it might not last long against Yi Xiang's attacks. However, Yi Tuan did not care. In fact, he was secretly delighted. Yi Xiang's attention was on Xiaoxian, that meant they had more time to escape. As for Xiaoxian's life, Yi Tuan did not care. More and more flames surged out of the wall, and the red giant's steps slowed. Everyone knew that he was reaching his limit, and when he could no longer stand, he would be engulfed by the torrent of flames. When that happened, Xiaoxian would be finished too. The Yi family was relieved that Yi Xiang did not use this move on them. Even with the giant tortoise and the totemic formation of 100 people, they might not have lasted as long as the tribesmen. Xiaofan could feel the power flowing through his body reaching its peak. Every part of his body felt like an overloaded machine, crackling and rattling as if it would fall apart at any moment. His feet felt as if they were bound by solid and heavy chains. Even if it was just a small distance, it was extremely difficult for him to walk, let alone stand firm and withstand the torrent of flames that was constantly rushing towards him. He could not retreat. Even if it was just a small step, one step back would lead to a second step, a third step, until he was overwhelmed and drowned. All the white power in his body began to circulate. Xiaofan no longer felt cold. Instead, his blood felt like it was boiling from the constant flow of power, steam spewing out of his body. At this moment, Xiaofan suddenly realized that in his sea of consciousness, the white egg-shaped barrier that had been covering the totemic flames had started to melt. The shield gradually turned white and flowed outwards. Soon, there was no trace of the shield on the outer layer of the totemic flames. Although the white veil had disappeared, Xiaofan did not feel the white energy leaving him. It was still around him and had not left. Not only that, Xiaofan also felt that they were in his control. His 5 senses, which had been somewhat numb, sharpened again. The pressure around him was also rapidly decreasing, as if someone had moved a mountain that had been pressing down on him. His body suddenly felt lighter, and even his breathing became smoother. Within Yi Xiang's orange-red flames, the giant red figure stopped advancing but did not retreat. It stood there like a silent thinker. Within the Yi family's totemic array, the people who had been watching Xiaofan thought to themselves, is he finally unable to hold on? However, in the next moment, they suddenly felt a huge pressure coming from that direction. It was even stronger than when the Crimson Giant had appeared. What was going on? Even Yi Tuan, who had been searching for a crack in the barrier, could not help but look over. He felt a strong sense of apprehension, even fear. Over there, it seemed like something that had been sleeping for a long time was about to appear. "It's the totemic energy," exclaimed an elder beside Yi Tuan. When the fire seed's power formed a totem, it would emit energy waves unique to it. Before this, Xiaofan had appeared and left without a totem under his feet. This overturned the Yi family's understanding. Logically speaking, even if Xiaofan had mastered part of the Yi family's divination skills and could enter this place, a totem would have appeared whenever a person appeared. But they had never seen a Yanjiao totem appear under Xiaofan's feet. Was the kid finally forming a totem? No, he was just starting to form a totem. This was unbelievable to the Yi family. He could not even form a totem, yet he was able to walk around peacefully. This totem had come too late. Also, why was there such a huge commotion when the kid formed a totem? Just the early stages of the totem's formation already gave off a great pressure. Was Yanjiao's totem really that powerful? Wait, that's not Yanjiao's totem. Yi Tuan was shocked. He sensed something strange. That's definitely not Yanjiao's totem. But what I sensed was the prelude to the totem's appearance. If it's not Yanjiao's totem, what is it? Asked the elder beside Yi Tuan. Just as the Yi family members were guessing, the flood that was about to drown the crimson figure was suddenly pushed aside, as if it had met with an obstacle. It was as if a pair of invisible hands had blocked the onslaught of flames. Around the flame giant, the torrent of flames that had been constantly attacking the flame giant was separated. But Yi Tuan's group and Yi Xiang did not pay much attention to this. They were staring at the white flames that had suddenly appeared under the crimson giant's feet. 2 white lines of fire crisscrossed, forming 8 at each end. The 2 lines of fire looked like 2 elongated gongs, stacked vertically and horizontally. The 2 crisscrossing work runes were still expanding, and the torrents of flames were also blocked. The space around the flame giant was also getting bigger and bigger. What the hell is that? Someone shouted. He had never seen a tribe's totem in that shape. Wasn't that a Yanjiao? Wasn't Yanjiao's totem double-horned? Why was this happening? Many in the Yi family's totem formation took several steps back uncontrollably, as if a great pressure was pushing them away. Even Yi Tuan took great effort to steady himself. He did not retreat but still felt an oppressive pressure. If he had a physical body, he would have coughed up blood. If one could see Yi Tuan's eyes, they would see shock and fear in them, as though he had seen something unimaginably terrifying. That's... Yi Tuan felt a cold electric current coursing through every hair on his body. His hair stood on end as he shivered. Fear? Worry? In that moment, these emotions were pushed to the back. Yi Tuan's only thought was, why did this pattern appear in this situation? The atmosphere was a little strange. Even those who did not understand what the dual rune represented could feel the uneasiness of the three elders led by Yi Tuan. Their hearts sank. The white flames in the shape of a cross caused the entire battlefield to stop momentarily. Yi Xiang's hand trembled as he held the bracelet. The flame giant's appearance did not affect Yi Xiang, but the white flame pattern did. On Xiao Xian's side, changes did not stop because of the double-horned pattern. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a tyrannical force rushing up from under his feet. As the white flames expanded, the force became more intense, as if it wanted to break through everything around it and crush everything in its path. Xiao Xian's figure, which was originally made of flames, seemed to merge with the flame giant when it appeared. But now, white flames appeared from all parts of Xiao Xian's body, pulling behind him. Xiao Xian's figure became clear again. Half a step behind Xiao Xian, the white light that seeped out began to gather again, no longer spreading in other directions. The gathering ball of light continued to expand. Even the light from Yi Tuan's oracles paled in comparison. If the giant tortoise's white light was like the stars in the night sky, then the white light gathering behind Xiao Xian was like the sun that illuminated the world. The white light gathered to form a blurry figure. It was not large, like a clone of Xiao Xian, but the flames were different so it was not clear. Based on the Yi family's standard, the blurry figure was like Xiao Xian when he first arrived, an unstable newbie who could vanish at any time. But contrary to the Yi family's perception, the moment the white blurry figure appeared, the three-way stalemate on the battlefield changed again. Due to the appearance of the white double-work runes, a large area of empty space was revealed around the flame giant. From time to time, some white flames would jump up and down, and the tyrannical might that the flame giant displayed was several times stronger than when it first appeared. In this situation, the Yi family's totemic array appeared weaker. Yi Tuan felt stifled, a mouthful of blood stuck in his throat. He could neither swallow nor spit it out. The Yi family had 100-man array and the help of their ancestors' oracles. Yi Xiang was an old monster who had lived for more than 1,000 years, a once-in-a-thousand-years genius in the Yi family. And Xiao Xian? What did he have? He was just a barbaric tribesman. Yi Tuan felt stifled. But when he thought about how Xiao Xian's transformation could cause trouble for Yi Xiang and create an opportunity for them to retreat, Yi Tuan felt much better. But, why did he see that huge figure with white runes charging towards them? Chapter 801. The flame body was sturdy and solid, as if it was a real person. The crimson flame giant seemed to have broken free of its chains and mud. Its steps were light, free, carefree. The giant's steps quickened, from walking to running. The roaring of the flames on his body was like the roars of thousands of ferocious beasts. Each of them was roaring, and when they gathered together, they emitted an earth-shattering pressure. Wind and fire swirled around the giant's body as it ran, flames as sharp as knives bursting outwards with each step. Yi Tuan had thought that the tribesmen would attack Yi Xiang after his transformation. After all, Yi Xiang was the one who trapped them here. If they worked together, they would have a chance of breaking out of this boundary. However, no one expected the powerful crimson giant to change its path and charge towards the Yi family. The white pattern beneath the giant's feet kept the flames at bay. Yi Tuan could see a figure at the giant's feet. The figure was almost one with the flames on the giant's body, but the color was darker and blurrier. Still, he could see a figure standing there. It was Xiaofan, the one who created the flame giant. Other than Xiaofan, there was another figure behind him, glowing with a white light that could not be ignored. It was almost the same size as Xiaofan. No one knew what the white figure was, but everyone who saw it instinctively felt uneasy. The three silhouettes moved in unison, as if they were a single entity. Why is he running towards us? Someone in the Yi family's totemic formation asked in a trembling voice as he saw the approaching figure. I don't know, he's not going to fight us with Yi Xiang, is he? I knew that tribesman was with Yi Xiang. They're definitely working together. They had just been wondering what the white flame pattern was, but now they were too frightened to think about anything else. They stared straight at the crimson giant. Yi Tuan and the other two thought that Xiaofan had changed his mind at the last minute and was going to fight them with Yi Xiang. If that was the case, they would have no chance of escaping. Yi Xiang alone was troublesome enough. With the addition of this strange tribesman, they were in a dire situation. They might even be wiped out. However, as the flame giant got closer and closer, they noticed that the flame giant wasn't charging towards them, but towards the enormous tortoise that was blocking the wall of flames. The giant tortoise. The tribesman's target was the giant tortoise. What's he doing? Was he really going to fight them with Yi Xiang? Without the protection of the giant tortoise, the flame wall would come straight for them. Even with the protection of the totem array, they might not be able to survive under the pressure of the flame wall. However, in next to no time, all their surprise, bewilderment, and anxiousness were tossed to the back of their minds. Because they saw a scene that caused their scalps to go numb, and they were astounded to the point they were unable to make a sound. It was as if someone had choked their throats, and a coldness that caused their entire bodies to be on the verge of being frozen arose within them. They saw the flame giant grab the giant tortoise's tail, which was almost as long as its shell, and drag it away from the wall of fire. The tortoise's claws, which had been blocking the wall of fire, shot out sparks as they left the wall. Ignoring the approaching wall of flames and the surging waves of orange-red flames, the flame giant grabbed the tortoise's tail with its two large hands and pulled it back. The flames that kept surging out of the barrier at the bottom were pulled back by the giant tortoise, as if they were pushed against the waves of the sea. Even though the giant tortoise was only made of flames, it was as heavy as a mountain. Every step the giant took caused the ground to tremble even more violently. His originally brisk steps became heavy once again. Xiaofan could feel the bones in his body making cracking sounds. It was as if his entire body was once again in an overloaded state. All of his strength was unleashed without reservation. The immense pain from overloading his body gave Xiaofan an indescribable sense of pleasure. Every ball of fire on the giant's body seemed to become a part of Xiaofan. He was only standing at the giant's feet. When he looked at the tortoise and the wall of fire, he struggled to lift his head. But now, Xiaofan no longer felt that way. He looked at Yi Tuan and the others at the same level. The giant's gaze was his gaze. The giant's hand was his hand. Flames spewed out of the flame giant's body like burning blood. Xiaofan felt like he was on an ancient battlefield, fighting with all his might. Live or die. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight. The giant's flaming arms dragged the tortoise's long tail. It roared as if it wanted to tear apart the world of fire. The rising flames seemed to be cheering it on. Under the flames, Xiaofan felt a strange emotion brewing in him, ready to burst out at any moment. Xiaofan felt like this was the fiercest eruption he had ever unleashed since he came to this world. It was also the most complete fusion with the strange white power. The giant tortoise's four palms left the ground. Its enormous body was forcefully lifted into the air. Everyone who saw this scene fell into a daze. This was Yi Tuan's first time witnessing and experiencing Yanjiao's brutality. Yi Tuan had a vague guess as to what the flame giant wanted to do. Stop! Stop! Yi Tuan wanted to roar, but he found that he could not. All his composure was gone. The giant did not seem to be wielding a giant tortoise, but a giant meteor hammer. It easily dispersed the torrents of orange flames coming from Yi Xiang's fiery wall. The scattered flames howled like beasts caught in a hurricane. The crimson flames around the giant continued to rise, bursting with even more power. The crisscrossing gong pattern under its feet grew brighter. As the giant tortoise was spun faster and faster, the giant's arms that were holding onto the tortoise's tail swelled once again. Dozens of streams of flame burst forth from the tortoise's body, as if it could not suppress the blood that was spurting out. However, the movements of the giant's arms did not slow down, and the hands that were holding onto the tortoise's tail did not relax. When the strength reached a peak, the tortoise's spinning motion changed. Turn leg, turn body, smash. He swung his arms fiercely, propelling his tortoise body. The tortoise's back smashed down fiercely like a meteor hammer. In that instant, when the power reached its peak, the flame giant's figure blurred, including Xiaoxian's and the white figure behind Xiaoxian. The blurry silhouette was like a bonfire blown by the wind, about to disappear in the next moment. However, it felt completely different. The three figures merged into one. A heroic howl seemed to pierce through time and space, drowning out the sound of the wind and fire, drowning out the giant tortoise's angry roar, drowning out everything. Yi Tuan felt as if he was looking at the soul of a flame that had burned for billions of years. Boom! It was as if countless thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The deafening boom made everyone lose their sense of hearing. Their nerves were numb from the shock. No one could remain unaffected by this. Even the Yi family's totemic formation was shaken to the point of dispersing. Even with the protection of the Yi family's totemic formation, the totemic formation was also shaken to the point that it looked like it was going to collapse at any moment. The torrent of flames that rushed over were all dispersed in an instant, and the exploding flames filled every corner of the enchantment. The flames that formed the array beneath everyone's feet were thrown high into the air. Countless curtains of fire, accompanied by fireballs of various sizes, rushed upwards like meteors. They were frail figures trapped in the curtains of fire and meteors, so minuscule that they could be easily dispersed. It was as if the entire world was being turned upside down. The sealed enchantment, under the huge impact and vibration, revealed the dark background below. If one looked down from above, they would see many black cracks on the enchantment below. They were like black lightning that appeared in the fire, constantly twisting and changing shape in the vibration. Yi Tuan looked at the array beneath his feet, at the black cracks that looked like twisting pythons. His mind, which had been in deep thought, went blank for a moment. His voice trembled. It's broken. However, no one could hear him now. Everyone was under the immense pressure of the world being turned upside down. The Yi family's biggest pillar of support, the totem formation guarded by 100 people, was like a fire seed. The orange-red flame at the core of the totem formation was like a candle flickering in the wind. No one knew how long it could last. However, in this world of fire, the huge, crisscrossing duplex character pattern formed by white flames was like a mark deeply engraved on a hard rock. No matter how the fire hit it, no matter how the surroundings shook, it still maintained the clear shape of the pattern, as if nothing in this world could change it. Chapter 802. In the heavily guarded courtyard of the Yi family's mansion. The tense atmosphere grew heavier. Those who could not keep their cool paced in circles anxiously, not daring to make a sound lest they disturb the people in the courtyard. The broken bone in front of Yi Tuan had already made their hearts sink. When no second bone broke, they heaved a sigh of relief. However, they waited and waited. Days passed. Although the courtyard was undisturbed by the totem, many could no longer maintain their composure. It was not physical torture, but psychological pressure. Some wanted to wait, but the waiting only made them extremely haggard. Their footsteps were light, as if they had not eaten or slept well for days. There were many such people. Some even fainted while waiting. The mental and psychological pressure was unbearable even if they did not do anything physically taxing. Moreover, this had been going on for a long time. It's good news that there's no movement, someone thought. At the very least, there were no signs of broken bones or broken stones. It seemed that the situation over there was still stable. Nothing must happen. Otherwise, the Yi family will be in trouble. The people around the Yi family were anxious. Ever since the Yi family closed their doors, there had been a constant stream of people coming to investigate. Some were from the other 5 tribes in the royal city, while others were from other places. Although they seemed to be worried for the Yi family, they had ill intentions. If the Yi family was in danger, they would take advantage of the situation. Friendship? In the face of benefits, the 6 tribes in the royal city never cared about friendship. If any of the other tribes were in danger, the Yi family would also intervene. Therefore, as fortune-tellers, they knew better than anyone what the consequences would be. On this day, after a short rest, they returned to the courtyard. Go back and rest. We'll keep watch, the leader said to the people in front. Now, there were 2 groups of people taking turns to guard and rest. In front of them was a man sitting on a leather cushion near Yi Tuan. He had dark circles under his eyes and his eyes were lifeless. His hair was messy and his clothes were stained with mud. This would never have happened in the past, but now, everyone was used to it and no one cared. Just as the 2 groups were about to switch, the person who got up from the beast hide massaged his numb and stiff legs. He was about to say something when he shuddered and looked at Yi Tuan's group. In the courtyard, the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand glowed brightly. The bone pieces in the shell jumped rapidly. Everyone stared at the tortoise shell in disbelief. Naturally, they knew what the changes to the tortoise shell meant. He even used the oracle bone artifact left behind by his ancestors. Is Yi Xiang really that powerful? I wonder how the battle is going. Many people whispered. No matter how much they tried to comfort others, there was only one thought in their minds: danger. Yi Tuan was forced to use his ancestors' oracle bone artifact. What kind of dire situation was that? Seeing this, the people who were supposed to take turns to rest did not leave. They returned to guard the courtyard. How could they be in the mood to eat at a time like this? They would not be able to sleep even if they went back. Just like that, the days passed. The people in the courtyard grew more haggard. The guards outside the mansion also grew restless. Everyone was panicking and some were already having other thoughts. After a period of time, the weather gradually became hotter. The people who were guarding the courtyard, although they were sweating profusely due to their anxiety, felt waves of coldness from their bones. Something was wrong. Something seemed to be suppressing the totem formation again. It felt like it could not hold on any longer. Suddenly, the totem in the courtyard grew brighter. The energy waves from the totem became more obvious and unstable, as if a hammer was pounding on it. What's wrong? What's going on? They did not know what was going on and could only worry. Not long after, they heard a crisp, crack sound. The sound was not loud, but it was as if their nerves had been snapped. The people in the courtyard stared at the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand, their eyeballs about to fall out. Their faces were pale, large beads of sweat rolling down their foreheads. They did not even bother to wipe it off, petrified as they stared at the tortoise shell. Impossible. Impossible. The person closest to Yi Tuan stared at the tortoise shell, his lips trembling as he spoke with a sharp, piercing voice. On the turtle shell in Yi Tuan's hand, where even the Wuxia family's sharpest sword would not be able to leave a mark, there was now a crack in the shell. Soon, they did not have time to stare at the tortoise shell because the totem in the courtyard was flashing even more violently. It could not even maintain its shape. It was about to break the formation. Wu, the totem that almost covered the entire courtyard, flashed rapidly before exploding. Sparks flew like meteors across the night sky and were extinguished. The people in the courtyard gasped. The person closest to Yi Tuan strode forward to support Yi Tuan. Before he could ask, Yi Tuan spat out a mouthful of blood and roared, "That Yanjiao." After that, Yi Tuan's eyes rolled back and he fainted. The other two elders beside Yi Tuan were not unconscious, but they were not much better off. Their faces were pale and they looked older than ever. They struggled to keep their eyes open and their withered bark-like hands trembled. If not for someone supporting them, they would not have been able to sit and would have fallen to the ground. Behind Yi Tuan and the other two, in the 100-strong formation, many people had fainted with blood oozing out of their orifices. It was difficult to tell how badly they were injured, but everyone who saw this knew that they had lost this battle. They had lost terribly. The Yi family was in for a major upheaval. As for what Yi Tuan said before he fainted, some people began to ponder. Wasn't he going to fight Yi Xiang? Why would Yi Tuan mention Yanjiao? And the first thing he said was Yanjiao. He did not even mention Yi Xiang. Yanjiao? Why would Yanjiao be involved? The Yi family was in chaos. In the royal city, the other tribes who had been keeping an eye on the Yi family also heard the news and began to move. Far away from the royal city, on another continent, at the foot of a mountain range near Eagle Mountain. Xiaofan suddenly opened his eyes and took a few deep breaths. The feeling of dizziness and exhaustion faded a little, but his muscles were still trembling. The feeling of overload was still there, and his clothes were all soaked in sweat. Cha-Cha heard the noise and hurried over to call out to him. I'm fine. Xiaofan waved his hand weakly. Even raising his arm was difficult. After resting for a while, Xiaofan felt that he had recovered some of his strength and slowly stood up. Only then did he realize that the place where he was originally sitting had a crisscrossing double I pattern. It looked like a mark left behind after the rocks on the ground had been melted. After thinking for a while, Xiaofan still couldn't understand why this happened. The rumbling of his stomach made Xiaofan feel very hungry. He got up and walked towards the forest, planning to find something to eat first. After a few steps, Xiaofan sensed movement from Yi Zong's side. He looked over and saw Yi Qi glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. "You!" Yi Qi pointed a trembling finger at Xiaofan. He spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood and fainted. Chapter 803. Xiaofan ignored Yi Qi and Yi Zong. They didn't seem to be in good condition, especially Yi Qi. He was severely injured and fainted after uttering only one word. The panicked slaves were trying to save him. Xiaofan looked away. He was starving and his vision was blurry after just a few steps. He forced himself to set up a trap. With his current strength, he couldn't take the initiative to hunt. While guarding the trap, Xiaofan ate some of the meat Cha-Cha brought back. However, Cha-Cha ate raw meat and Xiaofan didn't have the time to light a fire to roast the meat, so he ate raw meat as well. When hunting in the tribe, they often encountered situations where it wasn't appropriate to light a fire. It wasn't rare to eat raw meat. While waiting for the prey, Xiaofan noticed that something was wrong with the surroundings. He didn't notice it before, but after eating and resting, he noticed that the forest was strange. Xiaofan remembered that it was already winter when he came here. Although the weather here didn't change much throughout the year, there were still changes in the trees. When Xiaofan arrived, the trees had already borne fruit. Now, there were no traces of fruit on the trees. There were no rotten fruits on the ground either. Xiaofan climbed to a high vantage point and looked into the distance. The strange feeling in his heart intensified. Xiaofan suddenly felt a familiar aura approaching quickly. It was almost silent. Not long after, a figure appeared in the forest. Wuxia. Xiaofan looked at the person in surprise. Wuxia was wearing a gray hemp cloak. Since it was daytime, he still wore a hood as usual. Xiaofan didn't expect to see Wuxia here. "Why are you here?" "I'm looking for you." Wuxia looked around. His gaze lingered on Yizong and Yiqi for a few seconds before he turned to Xiaofan. "You've been gone for too long. The Yanjiao people are worried." "I was gone for a long time." Xiaofan knew that the flow of time in that strange dark world was different from the flow of time in the real world, but he only thought that he had stayed there for 10 days at most. "In a few days, there will be a full moon." Wuxia didn't say how long he had been gone, but Xiaofan knew that he had been gone for more than half a year. It was no wonder that the Yanjiao people were so anxious. They said they were going to investigate the movements of the royal city people who had entered the forest, but in the end, it took them more than half a year. Winter had long passed, and the rainy season had ended. Xiaofan knew that Wuxia wouldn't lie about this. They would know when they looked at the moon at night. He also believed Wuxia's words. He had really left for more than half a year. No wonder the forest gave him such a strange feeling. Xiaofan remembered that before he entered the world of darkness, winter had not yet passed. How could half a year have passed in the blink of an eye? To Xiaofan, that battle had only been half a day, but in the real world, so much time had passed. It was hard to imagine that a battle that had taken more than half a year. "I haven't heard from you, so I came to take a look." Wuxia said simply, "The others can't sense your exact location, but your shaman seems to be able to. She can't leave the tribe, so she can only point out a general direction for the search team." Wuxia briefly told Xiaofan why he was here. The Yanjiao tribe had discussed going into the forest to search for Xiaofan, but Wuxia volunteered that he could sense Xiaofan's exact location and they could search for him in the forest. Wuxia didn't like traveling with others. When he joined the other tribes in the Flaming River Basin to hunt, he treated it like a game. The others were afraid of him, and he didn't want to travel with them. That was why when Yanjiao suggested sending a team to go with him, Wuxia refused. That was indeed the case. It was much more convenient and relaxing for Wuxia when he was alone compared to when he was with others. Xiaofan studied Wuxia and nodded, "Not bad, your complexion is much rosier. Looks like you've been doing well in the forest." Wuxia's pale complexion had regained some color, but it was still slightly rosier than a normal person's. Now, Xiaofan noticed that Wuxia's complexion was filled with vitality, and he didn't look sickly or pale. How much blood did he suck to have such a change? As for why Wuxia was able to find Xiaofan, it was mainly because of the power Xiaofan used to revive him. That special power affected Wuxia, allowing him to come back from the brink of death. It also allowed him to find Xiaofan's location. With his immortal body, Wuxia had an easier time in the forest compared to others. "Did everything go well? How's the tribe doing while I was gone?" Xiaofan asked. Wuxia thought about it and said, "It's going well." This was to tell Xiaofan that his journey had been smooth. The Yanjiao tribe was doing well too. Xiaofan didn't plan on getting too much information from Wuxia. After all, Wuxia was a man of few words, and he didn't seem to be interested in anything. However, just as Xiaofan thought that Wuxia would start to think about life again, Wuxia spoke. I met a bat, a big bat. It's half a step away from becoming a beast king. It should be the one you mentioned before. Wuxia gestured with his hand to outline the bat's size. The one from the Bat Mountain? Xiaofan frowned. That bat wasn't easy to deal with. Did you lose to it? Wuxia shook his head with a strange expression. No. Wuxia had met that bat when he was hunting for food. Both of them liked to hunt at night and they both drank blood. Both of them seemed to have a natural instinct for which beast's blood tasted better. Their hunting targets were very similar as well, so it wasn't strange for them to meet. The strange thing was, how did Wuxia escape from the bat's claws? In response to Xiaoxian's confusion, Wuxia told him what happened. Not only did Wuxia not lose to the bat's claws, but he also got along well with the bat. The bat didn't attack Wuxia. Instead, Wuxia gave the bat some prey and the bat accepted it. After that, the bat helped Wuxia get rid of two beasts that were difficult to deal with. When Xiaoxian heard about this from Wuxia, he was also quite surprised. With your strength, how would you fare against the giant bat? Asked Xiaoxian. No, Wuxia said without hesitation. His immortal body didn't mean that he couldn't be killed. There were limits to his abilities. Even though he hadn't really fought against the bat, he knew the difference between them. He wasn't confident that he could win. But it has a familiar aura. It's similar to mine, Wuxia said as he looked at Xiaoxian. Is that bat connected to you? Connected? Xiaoxian thought for a moment and briefly told Wuxia about his first encounter with the bat. He only left out the part about mining fire crystals. The fire crystal mine was a secret of the Yanjiao tribe. Only a few people in the Yanjiao tribe knew about it. After all, Wuxia wasn't a Yanjiao. Xiaoxian wouldn't tell him about the fire crystals. Xiaoxian emphasized how the bat competed with the other bat candidates to become the leader of the bat swarm. Xiaoxian still remembered that he was holding onto the fire crystal. Without him noticing, the power of the fire crystal was absorbed by the bat that was still evolving. After that, the bat was the first to complete its transformation and killed all the other bat candidates. In the end, it became the leader of the bat swarm. Perhaps it was because it absorbed the power released by Xiaoxian's fire crystal during its evolution that the bat had a similar aura to the Yanjiao tribe. This was also the main reason why it didn't attack the Yanjiao tribe. Although the bat had a similar aura to the Yanjiao tribe, it had another aura that was different from the Yanjiao tribes. It was an aura that came from Xiaoxian's body. This aura was stronger than the Yanjiao's aura. Wuxia was able to come back to life because Xiaoxian used another type of power. Therefore, to the bat, Wuxia was more similar to it than the other Yanjiao tribesmen. They were more of the same kind and closer. After what happened in the strange dark world, Xiaoxian had a better understanding of the white power in his body. Wuxia's situation must have something to do with it. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. What are you looking at? Xiaoxian turned his head and saw that Wuxia seemed to be looking for something. There's the smell of blood, said Wuxia. Blood? Oh, there are two people from the Yi family and their slaves over there. Xiaoxian pointed in the direction of Yi Zong and Yi Qi. No, it's not them. Wuxia shook his head. I can smell their blood but I'm not looking for their blood. Their blood definitely smells better than the other tribesmen's but there's another type of blood here that smells even better. Wuxia sniffed carefully and scanned his surroundings like a radar. Finally, he looked up. It's there. It's coming from up there. Wuxia's eyes flashed red and his long fangs grew out of his mouth. He lifted his leg and was about to charge up the mountain. His entire body exuded a murderous aura. From the flaming river to here, Wuxia must have seen blood everywhere he went. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a strong murderous aura. Xiaofan hurriedly stopped Gan Xie. Don't be rash. Keep your fangs and your murderous aura. This is the territory of the giant mountain eagles. Don't move around carelessly. Be careful. As for what's up there. Xiaofan thought for a moment. Let me eat something first. After I recover, I'll go up with you. Gan Xie retracted his gaze and paused. Then, he nodded. All right. He could feel a strong aura around here. It wasn't the aura of a living creature, but it made him nervous. If it wasn't for the murderous aura, he wouldn't have wanted to stay here. However, the smell from the mountain excited him and made him willing to take the risk. What was at the top of the mountain? Xiaofan wondered. There weren't many beasts in this long mountain range. The higher up they went, the fewer animals there were. Besides the giant mountain eagles that came from afar, there was nothing else. No. There were exceptions up there. Those white worms. Xiaofan remembered the white worms that broke out of the ground and ran up the mountain. He turned to Cha-Cha and asked, "Did those white worms come down?" Cha-Cha looked at the top of the mountain and then at Xiaofan. He shook his head. They didn't come down. There were so many white worms up there, but they didn't come down. Xiaofan thought back to the first time he came here. Back then, the white worms would steal the ice crystals on the top of the mountain. Then, they would transform in their nests and turn into butterflies. Moreover, it was almost the full moon now. Xiaofan saw the white worms that turned into butterflies at this time too. Xiaofan still remembered what the white worms looked like when they turned into butterflies. The blood that Cha-Cha mentioned was most likely the white worms. If it was the giant mountain eagles, Gan Xie wouldn't be this excited even after knowing Cha-Cha for so long. Whether it was the white worms or something else on the mountain, Xiaofan decided that he would go up and take a look when he recovered. He still remembered why Yizong and the rest were here. Xiaofan also wanted to know if the white worms had any other secrets. Perhaps they had something to do with forging? It was rare for him to come here, he wouldn't be satisfied if he didn't find out. While Xiaofan stared at the mountain and planned his next move, a tense atmosphere hung in the desert. It had been like this for half a year, and the cause was the change in the desert's ruler, Rock Hill City. Shu and his men looked nervously at a sand dune in the distance. There was an underground palace at the bottom of the dune. Yixiang was in there. Shu knew what Yixiang was doing. He knew that Yixiang would be in there for a long time, but he didn't expect it to be this long. Although Shu had confidence in Yixiang, the longer this went on, the more he felt a sense of foreboding. The Yi family was nothing to worry about. If Yixiang was here, it wouldn't take this long. What was going on? Shu had been thinking about it for the past few days. Now, he knew that his hunch was right. There was a loud boom, as if a giant beast was crashing into the ground. Sand flowed down the dune in front of them like water. The entire dune caved in with the boom and the ground shook. The place where the underground palace was built was relatively sturdy, but now, it seemed to have turned into quicksand, swallowing the entire dune. Retreat! Shu shouted for the team to retreat quickly because the scope of the quicksand was rapidly expanding. Boom! Two silhouettes rushed out of the sunken area, creating a large hole. Then, 3 more silhouettes rushed out one after another. The 3 figures that rushed out from behind gathered together to protect the person in the middle. The 5 figures that appeared were the puppets that Yixiang had placed in the underground palace. Shu had seen them before when he entered the underground palace. His attention was not on the 5 puppets, but on the figure they were protecting. Yixiang, who was being protected from the underground palace, didn't look well. There was blood at the corner of his mouth and the wooden bracelet in his hand was broken. How could this be? Shu was shocked. Due to Yixiang's injuries, Rock Hill City had to temporarily abandon some of its expansion plans. It didn't even care about the war at the coastline. The desert entered a period of relative peace. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.